Was involved in bringing the Jewish people to Israel itself is not only a mitzvah and not only more observant of the Torah, but I would even go so far as to suggest that it might be even more observant of the Torah than some ultra-Orthodox rabbi in New York who isn't going to Israel.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that, but I'm saying you guys both know you're wrong. I mean, it's Sabbatean, and any concept you say, oh, you living in Israel is a mitzvah. No,
yes, it is.
If you do not keep Torah and mitzvahs, it's better that you don't live in Israel. Don't give us that crap that living in Israel is some mitzvah if you're not keeping Torah and mitzvahs.
But Doovid, just being in Israel is keeping about a third of the Torah.
That's Sabbatean crap.
That is 650 principles of the Talmud is what that is.
That's Sabbatean crap, and you know it.
Why do people
Sabbatean?
Sabbatean
is an inversion of the Torah.
Exactly.
So why don't?
How is it inverting the Torah?
You have to accept the oil Malchus Shemayim. You have to accept the yoke of God.
You can't a lot of these Orthodox rabbis who don't go to Israel. That's my point. It's yeah.
Out hypothesis, morphed into a religious-like faith-based belief.
Well, Roger, what about Rabbi Nosson Slifkin and saying like, okay, he actually was considered pretty Orthodox and he was officially excommunicated for writing a book similar to yours, and that probably wouldn't happen to you because you're not part of those circles to be excommunicated. But what makes you think that you wouldn't be excommunicated by the rabbis? They would not appreciate what you're doing. They would ban you.
No. Okay, so here's a big difference.
What's the big difference? Can't you just admit that your books are not going to be well received in Jerusalem? If they read them, you would be more likely to be excommunicated than honored.
Okay.
Will you admit that? Will you admit that? Or you're saying, no, that's not the case?
Yeah, that would be true if my books contradict Chazal rather than prove Chazal. And so I have a chance, twice to engage in a debate with Rabbi Slifkin. And I said, well, how about, the
calculation of
actively. So could I please get in a word edgewise here? My point is that the Shabtai Zvi was actively and publicly fornicating in front of the Torah in his synagogue. He was having pork and ham and standing up at the bima and declaring it kosher. He was doing, wait a minute, He was doing everything in verse. He wanted to overthrow the Torah in every way and that was his version of bringing out a Messiah. Now, to be secular and to not be observant, that doesn't mean that you're getting up in synagogue and declaring ham kosher. I don't think that Sheldon Adelson, maybe he didn't observe Shabbos as literally as an Orthodox rabbi would hope, but he wasn't getting up and announcing publicly that Shabbos was not valid. He wasn't getting up publicly and violating it. I mean, we know, like, for example, Henry Kissinger, talk about Sabbateans, during the 1973 peace negotiations, while he was at the King David Hotel, he ordered a ham sandwich and they couldn't find one. And he said, you find one and go out and get it. And for that reason, he was excommunicated from Judaism, and rightfully. That is Sabbatean, to do this publicly as a statement. I don't think that Sheldon Adelson, maybe he might have had ham in the privacy of his home, but he wasn't getting up publicly and declaring it kosher. So I disagree that he would be Sabbatean just because he might have been more secular or a bit less observant than some Orthodox rabbi.
You completely strawmanned the position, and that's why I wanted to say it simply so you wouldn't strawman the position. The Sabbatean way of thinking is the concept that you could be a good Jew, you could make it to heaven if you don't keep Torah and the mitzvahs. And to say if Sheldon Adelson, he didn't have to be publicly eating a ham sandwich, even if in the own privacy of his own house, he was not keeping Sabbath, he is not making it to heaven, no matter how many people he helped out. And if you say so, that is Sabbatean. You don't have to go to any extreme. Sabbatean is a rabbi who tells you, Charles, that you're not going to hell. Because a proper rabbi would have told you, I'm sorry, Charles, as a friend, I'm here to warn you, you're going to hell, and you better change your way. And don't think that these little good things you do on the side are going to help you.
No, a Sabbatean is someone who is trying to uproot the Torah.
No, that's what you say. You are uprooting the Torah by denying the punishment for sin, and by saying that you could do a few good deeds and that's going to make up for your sin. That's a Sabbatean calculation.
That may be, Doovid. I mean, if he's denying the punishment for sin, fine.
And you just did it right there. You said if Sheldon Adelson didn't keep Sabbath in his house, that you could say it's possible he's not going to heaven. I'm sorry, even though he sent 500,000 Jews to Israel.
No, that would be between him and God. But if he's doing it publicly, then, look. was involved in
Yeah, but just look forward in the dangers of e-personality. If he's an introvert, incel or whatever, and when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. That's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process. What's the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates?
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're gonna fulfill the Canadian dream and the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. I'm gonna go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm gonna be successful. And one day I'm gonna have my own apartment. I'm gonna have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm gonna have my own possessions. I'm gonna see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. Really looking forward to the show tonight. I had some interesting insights about crabs that I'm excited to share with everybody. And I will hand over the intros for the show to Doooovid. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for doing this again, Jennifer. Great week. Ricardo, see if he's going to even pop on. I haven't spoken to him in a while. You can see I got a new chair. I'm probably going to get new computer equipment, but I ordered and assembled a new chair. So I had kind of these uncomfortable chairs that, thank God I inherited from my grandparents, but they weren't probably a good streaming chair. So I ordered and assembled a chair. COVID-19 is relatively low here in Michigan right now, but there's still thousands of cases and tens up to 100 deaths. It's nothing to be proud about. In all likelihood, it could just pop back up any moment. They got possibly these armed protests around the nation starting. So, we'll talk about these things. We had, my show, Charles, is getting bigger. Calls, and Roger was on that. So, that was pretty good. And Root and Branch is, going well. It looks like, we've got them live. And, I've teamed up with them. I'm not I guess I'm not a co-host, but he's even listing us in their credits. So looking forward. You got 2 new guests Monday and Wednesday, and I put some serious effort into studying this Arizal's Shar HaGilgolim, the Book of Reincarnations, and from the talk me and Jennifer gave in Jerusalem, and I was just doing more research, preparing my Ask the Rabbi in Reincarnation, and I was pretty comfortable with my understanding of the rudimentaries of Jewish theology on the topic. But I had never seriously attempted to study the Arizal's Sefer Gilgolim, and I noticed Chabad had an online translation. So I've been reading through that, and it's absolutely fascinating. And it's even expanded my approach to Judaism, because I knew this stuff existed, and I'd never deeply studied it more than it had to be mentioned. There's books on it and various things. I never did research into it in my time in rabbinic school, but it's all over the place. And I knew about this, every yeshiva student knows about the Arizal and Sefer Gilgulim. And, so we'll probably talk more about that. I even shared some of the ideas with Jennifer. So I guess not much else exciting happening. I started back on the CD collection. So if Nick Petrus comes in, I still have some CDs I'm supposed to send him, and I'm got new CDs coming in. So hopefully we'll finish up with those. I'm finishing up with the S's, so I have T through Z. So I guess I'll let Jennifer say whatever she's got to say, and also what we're going to talk about. Probably some general technology thing. Jennifer has a few new charts and ideas, and but we're also going to talk about possibly future business ideas, but just the concept of in theory, so to say, what happens if someone donated $10,000 to Root and Branch? What would we do with it in terms of like buying computers, setting up the tech, and just kind of like a streaming type idea? Like, what if a person wanted to do this? How much would it cost, and what would they get for what they pay? And so we should probably do a chant. I think I have one ready. So Jennifer wants to say something. Let me get my chant ready.
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure what you mean, King Kush. So it's nice to see all the adoring fans of Doovid in the chat. And the cryptic posting, sometimes it's mildly entertaining, but sometimes it's just too cryptic. And it's like, what are you saying? It's all about that signal to noise. So I'm excited mainly to be able to share some diagrams that I made, because I want to get people thinking like the way that these people were thinking back in the day. Like, how did Plato look at things, or Plotinus or Pythagoras or any of these other people? Was there actually any difference between them? So I'm hoping my new system will sort of be like able to distinguish all the other schools and show where they're similar and where they're not, and sort of grow the opportunities for learning within that. So if you want to go ahead, Doovid, with the opening chant, are you ready?
Yeah, can you screen share that last thing I sent you about Journey of the Soul?
It just might take a minute. I can,
okay.
though.
So I'll tell the chant, but I was just saying that I was thinking about reincarnation and how important it is to Judaism in relation to when I was in Jerusalem and New York and Chabad versus Jews, modern Orthodox Jews, secular Jews, activist Jews. And I remember that in Jerusalem and in New York, reincarnation was a pretty prominent part of people's day-to-day belief. It was something talked about often. It was something that was openly mentioned in rabbi speeches. It was almost it was a regular topic in maybe as much to say as the concept was almost always mentioned in almost every lecture in like extreme Hasidic and Kabbalistic leaning schools. Like, there wouldn't be a single lecture that would go by where the concept wasn't mentioned. So, like, as part of the theology, anyone who studied it has seen that and familiar with it. So but it's not something that's like a main part of Jewish religion. Like, just because Jews or been to synagogue wouldn't mean you would know anything about this, or even that Jews are experts in it, or would even know that there's a detailed theology. So this is just like a Chabad center, actually where my parents live. New young rabbi, and if you scroll down to the part about reincarnation, the 6th class, and you see it's just the Jewish perspective on what happens after someone, life after death, the rituals we do, the burial practice, the mourner's kaddish, and the theology. And you could see that the 5th lecture is reincarnation. I can't say, could you, it's not on the screen for me, but is it there if you want to, can you read what it says? the fifth lecture.
Lesson 5, here we go again. Reincarnation. More than a fascinating topic, Judaism provides a practical way to imagine this mystical process and explains why it is important both to departed souls and to our lives today.
Yeah, so I'm saying if you walked into a Chabad, I mean, so here they're going to have like a whole class on it. So, like, I mean, what happened? They probably rotate these classes every few years. So to have like a whole class lecture just on reincarnation would likely only happen like once every few years. But in a rotating class, you say like it's a topic that comes up, and when related to death, it's one of the main lectures. It's a staple of Jewish theology, and it goes back largely to the Arizal. And I mean, you want me to ramble on the Arizal for a minute before I do this chant, or is that not interesting to you?
Go ahead.
Okay, because I was thinking the effect of the.
I'm sorry, but I'm actually having trouble with your camera, and it's cutting off like the top of your head. So if there's any way you could just make it so that your head wasn't right at the top of the camera field, that would help me.
I have to think about how to like mount or put my do my camera a little better, but Luke just sent it, so I just put it in and then he like propped a book. But
this is pretty good. Before it was too heavy on the desk and pretty light on the forehead, and now it's a lot more balanced. What do you guys think in the audience? Let's hear some love for Doooovid, guys. He takes a lot of shit for all the great teachings that he shares with us. So let us know how the stream looks. We've already got some really good feedback, and I appreciate that because it's always about honing the craft. So, yeah, please tell us about that subject.
Okay, so the Arizal is one of the most important figures in all of Judaism. The Rav Isaac Luria, about 500 years ago, from the time of the Spanish expulsion, and coming to the town of Tzfat. And this is one of the main cities in Israel, and due to political and whatever reasons, the main settlement where some of the main scholars who settled after the Spanish expulsion in the late 1400s, early 1500s, settled in this town, Tzfat. And it includes really big names like Rav Yosef Karo and the Arizal and Rav Askari, and I've talked about this before, and I won't go too long on it, in the creation of Smicha, and really the refoundation of modern Israel. And Kabbalistically, one of these teachers, Isaac Luria, dies at 38. He's got a very wealthy uncle in Egypt who said had his own island, and could personally fund a whole city. And that's relevant possibly to this Kabbalistic model that I've talked about, like trickle-down spirituality, that if God, his light shone down on people all at once, it would crush people. Therefore, it has to go through these contractions, tzimtzum, that it's a unique style of Kabbalah, and to some extent it dominates Judaism. And he didn't write anything. One of his students, Chaim Vital, took notes and put out his teachings, and it's very coded. It's in Aramaic, and there's a lot of abbreviations of complicated concepts. And the Arizal was known to, I think he lived in the forest for like 7 years, and they say he would fast or just disappear into the forest from Sabbath to Sabbath. And so it was a mythical figure of how he knew what he knew. But then he was also part of these rabbinic circles in Tzfat. And
you still want me to share this?
No, it's not needed.
Website? Okay.
I just wanted to show how prominent reincarnation is in Jewish theology. The Chabad is openly promoting classes on it. Kabbalah, historically, reincarnation, there's hints at it in the ancient times, but really it starts popping up in Europe about 1,000 years ago, in these Kabbalistic books. There's a book called Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formations. These books all claim to be ancient books that were being revealed, but that they first appear in Europe about 1,000 years ago. Sefer Bahir, and then there's the Zohar, and all of these books are heavy on the concept of reincarnation. It's interesting that a lot of this also is during the Inquisition, at the time where reincarnation is being persecuted, people are being put to death for the belief in it. So it's possible from the Jewish perspective that like the sages always knew this, but they kept it hidden for various reasons, and then there was a dispensation to release this wisdom, as opposed to a scholarly view that it was taken and adapted from other traditions at this time. But could be because the persecution and the putting to death of people who believed in reincarnation, that it was transcribed into literature. So it's interesting why the Jews during this period of time, who where reincarnation is so unpopular in Catholic Europe, would have indoctrinated into our religion if we didn't always believe in it. But they're interesting concepts. But so the Arizal, who is this great scholar on Kabbalah and writes these literatures, almost like not a prophet. No one really believes he was a prophet, but in a way almost like received wisdom, where he raised himself up a level to reveal to humanity basically the mind of God. And he did a lot of things for Israel that a lot of people may not realize, and also say how integral reincarnation was to the greater belief system. But it's similar to Lord Chaitanya and Ramanujacharya and some of the sages I was mentioning, Jennifer, that he named the site of famous graves. Like obviously Israel, there like the sites of the prophet, the graves of Abraham and Sarah and Rivka, and even Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Maimonides. Some of those graves were well known to everybody, but there are thousands of graves that were obviously graves that the tradition had largely been lost, that we didn't know who they were. So the Arizal, miraculously figured out who was buried in which places, and he also claimed to say the path of their migration of the soul. So I'm saying that the Arizal was a mythical figure, and they say that I've prayed in his synagogue. I've been to his mikveh. There's a creek. I prayed at his grave, actually multiple times, maybe even like 10 times. He was legend that like when he prayed Friday night, the Kabbalah Sabbath, they would chant that the animals would come and dance with them. That was and it also we'll talk about all of this in relation to reincarnation. So from the Reb Chaim Beetal's books, which is generally referred to as the Eitz Chaim, the Tree of Life, the collection of the Arizal commentary, it could be a whole shelf, like 10 books. It's a big undertaking. It's probably known to be the most complex, difficult of all the Jewish literature, and specifically Shari Gilgolem, the book of reincarnation, is known to be the most difficult. And I've claimed multiple times that banking, the futures market, and modern finance largely comes from the Arizal's Kabbalah, and the Chabad movement is almost completely based off of the Arizal's Kabbalah. However, that the teachings on reincarnation are known to be the most difficult, even more difficult than the teachings that lay the foundations for modern finance and the state of Israel, and that the importance of it. And I hadn't really thought about this, so I think I have to credit Jennifer for enlightening me on the topic. And so I've been reading through this Shari Gilgolem, and it's like 40 chapters, and it's a very intricate system that's related to the complete cosmology of the creation, the origin of the world, to how souls are perfected, why souls were, or the origin of souls in the first place, and the idea of this breaking, the shattering of vessels that allows imperfections, and then the task of the material world in to reperfect this original shattering of vessels, and that being some sort of cosmic play that takes 6,000-7,000 years, it involves transmigrations of some sort of process for the world to go through to reach an end. And so I call it like a scientific axiomatic system that has a cosmology, because in theory it is basically like the mind of God, the secret of creation, how the interplay of the material and spiritual realm and the transmigration of souls is one of the single most important aspects on that. So I guess I'm going to do a chant, which is kind of like a kid's chant. It used to be one of my favorite, and it was sang by, it goes back, it's pretty popular. It's in Yiddish. The words are Gates of Rhine, like German, Gates of Rhine, go in, like go into, a nechumala. Nechuma is the Hebrew word for condolence, and the le at the end is like the German diminutive, because it's like a kid song. Gates of Rhine and Nechumala. Gates goes in condolences. Gates of Rhine and Nechumala in the Yiddish Neshumala, in a Yiddish soul, in a Jewish soul Neshumala. Gates of Rhine, a chayas in a yid, goes in life into the Jew. So Gates of Rhine Nechumala in a Yiddish and a Shumala, Gates of Rhine, a chayas in a yid. And so it's kind of a kid song. It's got a cute bounce, and sometimes they attach the words Or Zeru Latzadik Yishrei Leiv Simcha. And this is a famous Kabbalistic verse. It's from Psalms 97. It's chanted every Friday night in the Kabbalah Sabbath prayers. It's also taken out and part of the Kol Nidre, the opening to the Yom Kippur. And as I mentioned, the Jewish concept of reincarnation has this concept that like there's sages and rabbis that have like cities of souls that contain the souls of their followers. So in the Arizal's concept, you get part of your soul from your mother and your father. Part of your soul could come from a transmigration, and part of your soul comes from your rabbi. So that's the the system, and hopefully we'll talk about that. We hear Jennifer's thoughts on some of this, and so the Or Zerua Litzadik, the light of the righteous are like seeds. Zerua is like seedlings. Uli Yishrei Leiv Simcha, and they sprout forth the heart of happiness. And so Kabbalistically, this verse is a concept in reincarnation, or the effect of the righteous person generations later, that the good deeds of the righteous person has effect in later generations. So your average Jew, or even your average rationalist or Christian, or any person who has transmigration of the souls, could say like, okay, like the effect of the righteous people having has effects generations later. But the Kabbalists and the sages generally understood that to work through a process of reincarnation, or even like these larger souls of righteous people that are reincarnated into even whole groups or congregations of people. And it's related to free will in the concept, because the boundary condition and this concept of tikkun olam, of there being a purpose, that each person, when their soul enters a body, has a specific purpose that they're supposed to fulfill. And that's actually the origin of this word tikkun olam, repair the world. And I saw this new Senator Warnock spoke in Martin Luther King Day in the synagogue in Atlanta, and like tikkun olam, repair the world. Like every rabbi says that concept. It comes from that Arizal and it's a concept in reincarnation. Like anyone who knows anything about Jewish scholarship knows that Tikkun Olam is largely based off a concept in reincarnation. So thanks for letting me ramble a little bit. And so let me do this chant. Or Zarua Latzadik Kulishre Simcha. Or Zarua Latzadik Kulishre Simcha. Gates are rein in the Kumala in Yiddish and the Shumala. Gates are rein in Chayas in the Yid. Gates are rein in Chayas in the Yid. Gates are rein in Chayas in the Yid. Gates are rein in the Kumala, Yiddish and the Shumala. Gates are rein in Chayas in the Yid. 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 So that song is generally understood to mean the pain of taking birth, that it's a condolence to the soul. Gates are rein in the Kumala goes in, like a condolence to the soul because it has to take birth. That that even a young kid would be singing and taught this concept that the soul didn't want to take birth, that it was some sort of negative process that the soul, or limiting process, that the soul entered the body in the first place. And so even just like a kid song like that even 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kids would be singing in this verse, Or Zarul Tzaddik, that parents might even use to explain to their kid, like you have a soul and the origin of your soul, and your soul contains part of the soul of these righteous people from previous generations. So I would say that on like a Haredi, if you wanted to understand like what's the difference between maybe the Jews versus the Jews in Brooklyn, the more Hasidic, more Haredi Jews, or the Jews who are anti-Zionist Jews you see laying in front of buses and protesting the state of Israel. I think reincarnation will actually be extremely pivotal to understanding that. I was thinking about that because, like, generally no one believes in reincarnation. Like generally, like hardly, it's a topic almost no one talks about. But I remember when I lived in Jerusalem and Brooklyn, like it was just a given. Like the topic came up all the time, and like you could hear like mothers talking to their children about it. It was just something they believed, and I think that's why I teamed up with the Hare Krishnas. That you see that also, like anybody familiar with India, you're saying like reincarnation is how mothers explain to their kids like why they're here, what the meaning of life is. I mean, and so I appreciate Jennifer bringing that to my attention, and thinking about it and studying, finally studying with COVID-19, looking at this Shari Gilgolem that has really been mind expanding in a way that probably for like 10 years, like I don't think my mind has been expanded by studying or learning something like this for like maybe definitely years, maybe even more than a decade.
Well, that's just wonderful to hear and inspiring for people who maybe aren't interested or ready to take the full plunge, going full entropist, as it were. You can still derive benefits from the applied technologies. And just to go with what Doovid was saying, that I've got a couple diagrams here. I'm just trying to remember how I labeled these. Yeah, so sorry.
Just before Jennifer says that,
go ahead.
If you tie that into possibly anti-Semitism, you're saying like, well, why do people hate the Jews? God forbid. And it's like, because we believe in reincarnation. like obviously, like why else? And even if you tied it in to K-Mac's group evolutionary strategy and the banking and financing. It's like, no, it's just like the finance, the money, the usury. But the Jewish concept of finance is tied up in reincarnation. That even these concepts about the group strategy of why Jews would put ourselves up in a way that possibly might have extreme pushback and result in expulsions, but yet we keep on doing it generation after generation. That it is reincarnation that's central to Jewish theology of what positions us to to act in this way. Like how did you act out last time? Like, why are we doing the exact same thing that we did leading into Germany in World War II, or leading into France, or any of these other things? And you say, well, because of reincarnation, like it was preordained. And the Arizal, that there's a grand strategy that sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but at the end of the day, we're coming back anyways. And I mean, even Jennifer, like that's I'm gonna like checkmate her, like a chess checkmate on her. That like she's like, damn it, you're right.
Well, I'm going to re-checkmate you. I'm going to say, well,
people hate
since
Jews
we're just
because
doomed to have the
because
same conversation lifetime after lifetime, we should embrace the most long-term sustainable mindset. And I'll just argue in favor of my mindset, and you're free to disagree, and you'll continue to be free to disagree, because my system's not about forcing an ideology. It's just like what Doowovid described. It's you get the technology, you try it out, see how it goes for you, and maybe you get some results. In fact, I'd say probably more than likely you get some results, but it is proportional to how much you put into it. Like you can see Doowovid's a bookworm. When he can really focus, he remembered how to do a derivative. When many other people who were like supposedly in tech, when I asked them, like, what's the derivative of x squared, even something that simple, quote unquote, within calculus, blank look. Well, Doowovid has asked if child sacrifice relates to reincarnation, like everything does. So the way to look at it is that when you're alive, you experience space-time in one way, because your body is aligning your consciousness so that it can be in tune with the material realm. And when you're disembodied, i.e. post-death, when the heartbeat stops, you experience space-time differently. And it's very hard to explain how it's different, but you can sort of draw metaphors. That's like a big dissertation type thing.
From a rationalist,
things though don't relate to reincarnation any more than anything else necessarily. It's just like everything basically does. It's just your state. Ultimately, it's your state of mind.
I mean, from the rationalist anti-reincarnation perspective, is that in the ancient world, almost everyone believed in reincarnation, and it was bad and wrong, and that's what allowed the justification of suffering. Was the multiple concept was one, like, no big deal, this lifetime goes through and it's not so good, like you're a slave or you die in war, or life is unjust, but you come back and get a chance the next time. Or also that, like, these extreme injustices, like these horrible ceremonies like child sacrifice, that the only reason why humanity was able to participate in it was the belief in reincarnation. That, God forbid, no one's going to sacrifice their own kid if they don't believe in reincarnation. So from that anti-reincarnation perspective, is that the way they rooted out child sacrifice, or even human sacrifice in general, was to root out the practice, was to root out the belief in reincarnation, because they go hand in hand. So that would be the most extreme form of anti-reincarnation. It's possibly what they held in early Catholic Europe when they were persecuting it, when they held that the belief in reincarnation was so abominable, even to put people to death for promoting it. This belief that reincarnation was at the heart of immoral practices.
Well, it's just fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you could really pontificate about it forever. And so that's sort of
the
why
multiple truth hypothesis.
Well, that's what I'm thinking with this diagram. I can sort of give you a framework for your approach, which is itself a framework. So it's a framework for a framework. And what
You
this
gotta
will
reshare
do,
it. You gotta reshare the diagram.
sorry? What do you mean reshare the diagram? You want me to send it to you in a PM again?
No, I mean you gotta re-square the screen. You got it back on me.
From what I can see, it's on my diagram.
Okay.
Is it?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay. So I'm sort of like, I'm in Doovid's corner. You know, I want him to fully get to experience all the fruits of the inklings that he has, because it is a super fun domain. But, you know, why do people keep disagreeing all the time? Okay, let's start to answer the question. Well, it's because people disagree on axioms, you know, and it turns out that to actually make a information positive statement, i.e. a statement of fact, that there's all these things going on before you can do that. So all these little data floating around, these pieces of information, they're all going to be school specific. So they're particular interpretations of particular implementations of causal algorithms, of elemental chunkers, of canonical chunkers. So you've got this massive, now I don't know if this diagram is really in the right array that it should be, but the way it would be going is that, like, if you think of it as from going from undifferentiated to differentiated consciousness, it goes from the bottom to the top. So you have all this stuff hardwired into your biological axioms, because biology and culture are all tied up together. Schools, disciplines, emanations, et cetera, that's all tied up together. So you have this sort of set of de facto axioms. And this is, I think, a great way to explain why it's really hard to get an agreement on things, because you have to sort of step back 5 levels before you can start to make a statement that you could start to agree upon. And even then, at that point of agreement, you'd still have like an infinity of interpretations of the individual words. So we're going to take that fact into consideration and acknowledge why the ancients were great, because they were acknowledging that if you have too many elements, the whole system flies out of control in terms of complexity and too quickly to actually be discernible. So that's all I wanted to say on that for now, but we can talk about the elements that we were discussing earlier. And I learned that Kabbalah has 4 elements. The Ayurvedic and Platonic systems have 5. I believe the traditional Chinese medicine has 6. Possibly there are others. We'd have to go around and look, but nothing, practically speaking, is going to be that high. Just remember, like, 7 is really pushing the total full pedal to the metal of the measurement limit. Go ahead, Doovid.
Yeah, I see Roger in the chat. If he wants to come on, that's fine with me. But I was thinking from the Arizal system, and when I mentioned that the multiple truth hypothesis and the importance of it, and from the pure perspective of the Kabbalah, because you have schools up here, and I mentioned the Arizal says that part of your soul comes from your rabbi, that like you're born with your rabbi who has a part of your soul within him, and there's a predetermined connection. So every element of the Arizal's Kabbalistic system, even Chabad, Chachma, Bina, Das, which is a dualistic system of the origin of thought and emotions, of how the origin of thought and emotions derives from the spiritual realm, which is really the essence of what the conscious level of Kabbalah is trying to explain, of how a divine origin sparks these processes that lead to thought and consciousness. But I get the importance of reincarnation in the level of physics, and some of Jennifer's expertise is mentioned. The name of God in Hebrew is the verb to be. Yud He Vav He is a permutation, like in theory, of Hoya Hoiva Hoya Vahoiva Hoya Hoiva Hoya, that was, that is, and that will be. That God is at all times, that was, that is and that will be. And so the Kabbalists theoretically take the perspective of maybe there is no such thing as time. So theoretically, that the generation of the biblical prophets and of the previous sages are theoretically concurrently happening with what's going on now. So this is just kind of theoretical thing that some of the sages talk about. But the importance of like the concept of reincarnation, how you understand it. Was it sometime in the past that this soul was in a different being, and then that soul transmigrated, or even theoretically that like maybe there's no such thing as time, and that the past and the future are concurrently operating, and it's just some perspective that we see a time frame, but from a greater truth. And I think that's why I came up with or promoting this concept called the multiple truth hypothesis, to even to wrestle with these concepts, because generally that's what I'm saying. Yes, that probably has to be the answer, at least from a Kabbalistic framework, that if this is true, that there probably is no such thing as time to that extent. So reincarnation is not what we think it is, like something that, like a soul that exists in the past and is transmigration life after life, but it could be that we would see these things are concurrently happening. And so from the system of the Arizal, basically everything that we do is completely dependent on reincarnation. I mentioned like Tikkun Olam, that we have our original purpose that we took birth of, and the general soul that our mother and father give us, and our rabbi or guru gives us. But the main thing, there's one thing that we have to accomplish, and that's what we were put into the world. And it's kind of like a pass-fail test, that if we pass it, the mission is accomplished. In the Tikkun Olam, the Tikkun the Nefesh, the Tikkun the soul is rectified, and the world is rectified, and the person doesn't have to take birth again, or at least that part of the soul has been rectified and doesn't have to go through that process again. However, the person failed, that they would have to go through the process again until, so to say, they passed. However, other concepts like intelligence, even wealth or thought, understanding, in the Arizal system is basically understood as like conjuring souls of like the dead or previous sages. Like if you want to be smarter, you don't learn a mental technique. You conjure like the merit of previous sages, and somehow like bring their power of their soul into your soul. So conceptually, reincarnation is centrally at the center of every single process in Kabbalah, because the explanation of these physical forces is basically explained as drawing down these powers of souls. And as I mentioned, that there's like generalized souls, that the prophets, King David, so to say, like King David's prayers are prayers for everybody. Anybody could use those prayers and they work. And certain sages could merit to be a universal, that anybody could draw from their merit. And other people might have communal merit or various things. But so it's just interesting that looking at Jennifer's chart, and you mentioned schools, that like what school you're related to reincarnation, even how we process information. That is not, but at the same time, Judaism has a process of actualizing free will. So it's, you could fulfill your tikkun, and then you could die. So it's like God forbid, like the most common explanation Jews are familiar with, like little babies that die, and why that happened, because they fulfilled their tikkun and then they didn't need to live anymore. And so that's even Les had mentioned, he'd heard that many times. Roger had heard that. But the basic concept that like he did his tikkun, he fulfilled his purpose, and then like he could die, or he could just live a regular life. But beyond that, you could actualize free will, and from that you could draw down a soul into yourself that didn't exist when you were born. So a person, so to say, like an average person who becomes great, is not through like an actualization of working hard. And I mean, in some extent it is, but it's reciprocal to that a person draws down a larger soul or actualizes a larger portion of God. And that's generally understood in the concept of a transmigration. That's not like, like I just pray to God and, God, the light of God shines through me directly. That is usually understood that there's merit of previous righteous people that is there for the taking, like the verse I chanted, Or Zari Latzadik Yishralev Simcha, and anybody could tap into that and actualize their potential, and also on an evil basis that it could work that way too, that a person wants to do bad, that you can't just sin, that a person has to conjure a spirit, like if a person wants to do violence or murder or God forbid any of these severe sins or maybe even homosexuality, that they actually have to conjure a spirit into them that allows them to do that. So it was very interesting reading through some of this material, and I'm not sure if Jennifer has thought about any of these. I mean, it's almost mathematical because it's basically karma yoga. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, the Arizal would basically, be comparable to books on karma yoga. Although I would say from my search and knowledge of the Vedas that there is no Hindu saint or scholar that has produced a book comparable to Shari Gilgolam. I don't think there's any book that I've seen anywhere comparable to that.
I'm really glad to see that people are interested in the chat and actually asking good questions. So yeah, engagement is key. It's very key. So yeah, I guess I want to proffer the theory that these ancient religious systems function the way quantum mechanics is supposed to function. Basically, we can't get quantum mechanics to work because we're not approaching it using this standard model, which we're maybe going to argue is shared between multiple schools / religions / people. And we need to have, obviously a shared vocabulary, and even more than that, we need to be able to understand what the other person's saying. I think that a lot of times people are just really not understanding even what's being said. So hopefully these diagrams make that easier. I have another one. What did you think of the one with the definitions? Because I was trying to come up with a way to fully describe the computer Marga without using too many words that would be controversial. So I don't know if you can see that one.
Yes, now we got the blue one up. So yeah, they're both important because when we talk about causal logic, and we've reviewed these and the rules of logic, or even formal logic, or trying to reduce statements and ideas to mathematic formula, that may or may not be how we process information. So from a soft problem of conscious level, if you're looking at how neurons in sense perception could turn information, it could turn sense perception into information, and all the theories that we've been discussing and talking about, to a Kabbalistic system where it's a theoretical framework of how these things operate that isn't necessarily was more determined from introspection or received wisdom from the sages than scientifically testing. But from a show, you want to have intelligent conversation and be understood. Logical, clear thinking is very important. Roger, so you mute or turn off the diagram. But so the conversationalist in science, where it's this conversation has a purpose. We're not talking just to talk. The new person that was listening, Johnny, interesting character. I'm glad we met. but it's saying like, no, like I don't enjoy small talk. Like I don't like pleasantries, hello, goodbye, or how's the weather. There should be a purpose to talk, and otherwise, words are largely wasted, and they're better not stated. And especially if it's public, when you're taking other people's times, or you're trying to teach, and so words have to be very calculated. In order to do that, you need to be experts on logic and what follows, and this chunking theory is saying that why the multiple truth hypothesis, because it's beyond our understanding how the hard problem of consciousness, and like Avogadro's number and like neurons, and billions, trillions, things happening at astronomically short speeds, and to understand these processes, to break it into metadata. And it's like, so what is logic? What is talking? And even from a metadata, like Gödel's incompleteness theorem is there really a system of logic? Is there really data? Is there really information that's more valuable than other information, or like a hierarchy of information? And you could argue against it. And even the Kabbalistic system that's somewhat hierarchical is still like, unifying that it's monotheistic, and really all of it's part of a single unity. So, I'm glad Jennifer is furthering her insights, and I'm furthering my insights, and we're making causal diagrams, and hopefully people are understanding it. We'll be able to express ideas more clearly, and eventually that's why I say like a computer programmer. So for chess theories of consciousness, the great minds of expertise, the studies that I'm going to review more of and have done some on my channel, wrote computer programs to test this. So, so Jennifer here, model of consciousness, as of now, there are people who have similar competing models, and I mentioned some of them on my channel, and they've actually created computer models, and these models could, so to say, process thought, that in that if they enter data or information, that the way the model processes it, that so I think me and Jennifer are approaching that point where we're not there yet, but we're even with these models that she's making, and I'm not sure if Jennifer is going to be able to program it herself, or will have to recruit somebody who will be able to program these for us.
Hey, I just noticed that Roger dropped off, so if you want to come back, you're more than welcome. I'm not sure, maybe your connection, something happened. If there's a problem with connection speed, just join on audio only. So,
We'll have to
there's
walk Roger
probably,
through.
like, no chance that I'm going to code something in a computer. I could probably direct somebody else to do it, but I think it's important to just focus on ideas. And so, yeah, that's that. And I think for the model, like the crab thing, this is the model. This is the theory starting to make predictions. So I haven't quite checked every single crab to make sure. I know for a fact not every crab works this way. So don't, straw man what I'm saying, please, with regards to these crabs. Because not every crab is created equal. So I did have some videos of that as well that I wanted to show. Because there's one that you can see it's meeting the measurement limit one way, and then this crab's meeting the measurement limit another way. So you could argue like that this crab violates the measurement limit. So do you know how you'd structure that argument?
Not sure.
Yeah,
I see how you
so
structure
it has
the-
5. It has 5. That's more than 3 plus 1. It's got 4 tiny legs and then 2 claws, which would appear to be 5. And you could even argue that it's more than 5 because there's an additional movement possible at the pincers. So the way to look at it is it's one waveform constrained to the measurement limit in terms of implementing a particular. So you know how your mind can operate on different wavelengths? So per wavelength that it can operate on, it's constrained to the measurement limit in that what you call as phase space. So on first glance, you look at the crab and say, well, this crab actually violates the measurement limit because it's got 5 legs, quote unquote, whatever you want to call them. And that's more than 3 plus 1. But we can see that if we look at the motion of the crabs, that the motion between all their different appendages is not independent. So it's actually really hard to visualize the dependence. That's why I've got a couple videos ready for later. But I just wanted to show, first off, why this doesn't violate the measurement limit, because when he's moving sideways, like in the first one, he's got 3 plus 1 mirrored. And that, again, the mirroring is not a violation of the measurement limit, because remember the periodic table mirrors too, it has 7 rows. So 7 is also the measurement limit. I don't want to go into a big ramble about why that is, but just keep that in mind. So what we're looking for is degrees of freedom. So what happens? He has basically 2 mind states. He can put his energy into his feet, of which he has 8, and move around sideways. Or he can sort of hold on to his feet and not move too much and put his energy into his claws. And as you can see, it's just there's a conservation of waveform, I guess, area. I don't know. This is the first time I really explained this concept, but basically the way to understand the crab mind is that he's essentially a information centralizer from the environment, and we're the same way. And the crab has a bit of free will, quote unquote, which is really just will, where he can sort of decide whether he should do lateral movement or claw movement, right? So the better karma crab would be the one spending more time deliberating between these states when it was appropriate to deliberate, and acting when it was appropriate to act. So did you want to say anything, Doovid? I'll just grab the videos if people are interested, and if you want to say anything, or if you think there's anything I can do to improve on this diagram, or if it doesn't make sense, I can explain it better.
Yeah, very interesting. I was thinking like the Platonic form, where you would say that, like usually the chair example, where you say that, like a crab, that the concept of a crab exists in the spiritual realm, because there's differences between crabs, but this concept that there's a meta pattern that defines crabness, and it's not something that exists within the crab itself. It exists in a form in the spiritual realm, and that form could be seen as the essential form of anything that fits that definition of crabness. And there's things like the Arizal, when the sages and the books have kind of like received wisdom, a lot of times there's apparent contradictions. Like the sage says this refers to this and this refers to that, or is the same as this, and then they have in a different place like a contradiction or the opposite. And when you try to put that into a computer, that could give you an error, as opposed to mystical system. You say like, well, there must be some deeper meaning here, because generally you say it's received wisdom, it's not mistaken. They're just some level there. But what as Jennifer was giving her explanation, and which is more mathematical, I would say even more material. I was thinking of say even mathematics as
it's a geometric argument, primarily geometric argument.
Yeah, so generally the forms work geometry. I think on Root and Branch, Jennifer gave some of the Platonic argument about the sphere, by saying there is no perfect sphere in the material realm, and the idea of the measurement limit. But I was saying the Pythagoreans already gave that argument for the spiritual realm, that is saying just the fact that we could think of a perfect sphere, even though we know it doesn't exist, proves that the perfect sphere must exist. But we know that the perfect sphere can't exist in the material realm. Therefore, it exists in the spiritual realm, is somewhat like a logical proof to prove that the spiritual realms exist. And so, this concept of the forms is pretty important. And so when I do eventually release my scholarship on my channel on Judaism and reincarnation, we'll cover some of these mainstream opinions of most people that say that the Pythagorean concept of reincarnation is the basis for the Judeo concept of reincarnation, just adapted to the Kabbalistic language of the 10 emanations and 4 worlds, and as where the Greeks had a concept of forms, and but it's basically the same system.
I don't know to what extent you can say it's the same system, because like there's more than one way that systems can be similar, right? Like whether they're similar in rituals or similar in
Well, I mean, say
general beliefs.
the scholars would say that reincarnation appears in Judaism about 1,000 years ago. It is basically, if you compare the literature, it's directly transplanted from the Greeks. Like that these guys probably read Plato and the Gnostics, the early church fathers, which took upon from the Pythagoreans, and just translated into Hebrew, Aramaic, and recoded the language. So it's saying it's not just like a hypothetical, what's the Kabbalistic systems, what's the Pythagorean system, but the scholarly university atheistic level is saying even the transmission pattern makes sense, and saying, did the Arizal really spend 7 years in a forest talking to God, or did the Arizal, like read a bunch of Greek books at his uncle's house and transcribe that into Hebrew concept?
Yeah, lots of really important questions, and I figure it's as ripe for inquiry as anything else. So there's some confusion in the chat, it seems. I am not saying that humans can become crabs. I don't know how the heck you could possibly take that from what I said. I have to assume you're trolling. The way to look at it is that start with the octopus form. Okay, what is an octopus? It's a brain.
I'm saying transmigration. Theoretically, a person could take birth as a crab. Like, why not?
Well, I mean, I doubt that. That seems like a bit of a stretch, but let's just put a pin in it for now. You got to start with the octopus, okay? So we just remember, the origin of life, aqueous. Aqueous, all our solutions, all of our chemistry is aqueous. Life started aqueous. So that's basically where, you got to start with that assumption. So what's an octopus? Well, there's measurement limit because he's got 8 legs, right? Which is 3 + 1 × 2. So we know that the movement can be synchronized and coordinated, but if you go through the movement vector at any given time, you're going to get on par with the complexity of the octopus mind. And how big is that? Well, we'd have to do, brain scans on the octopus to figure it out. But as a reference point, they have done a study that humans have 11. So it's a good starting point. Again, still needs to be validated, though.
I was just noting that Reincarnated as a Crab is actually a popular novel. And there's another novel called I Reincarnated as a Crab that is also popular. I was just doing a search, and I'm not seeing in the Vedas if there's any mention about a crab.
I think one of the avatars is a turtle. That might be as close as you get, is a good old turtle avatar.
In the Greeks, there could be. I'm saying, isn't like is the crab one of the astrological symbols?
Indeed. And then there's this Carson, as I keep saying the word wrong.
I am seeing a crab here.
Carcinization.
No, so the Vedas mentions a crab. See the verse. The body simply a container for their soul until that body dies and their soul moves on to another body, like a hermit crab outgrowing a shell. That although I'm not seeing an exact verse, but I think that could be in the Vedas. That not the concept that someone would be reincarnated as a crab, but the comparison to the crab shedding its shell to the soul shedding the body.
That's kind of cute. Yeah, the thing I wanted to talk about was carcinization and why that means that if this is a convergent evolution vector, that means that it's converging upon the measurement limit. So basically, Mr. Crab is making the most use of measurement limit per order of crab unit possible, which is why everything keeps becoming more crab-like that's already in a semi-crab-like state. Because the crab array is what is possible in the measurement limit. Like you can see that almost all the area is taken up by the little mouth fangy things and the huge chompers. That's not the technical term. Claws. There we go. But yeah, in terms of like epic religious stories about crabs, no. We could think of one now, you know, the sort of like the mouse accompaniment of Ganesh type thing where he's like the humble garbage disposal at the bottom of the ocean, you know, never asks for anything in return, and horseshoe crabs get their blood drained and tossed back in the ocean like dirt. You know, maybe there's some sort of underdog story, Revenge of the Nerds, mystical crab archetype tale waiting to be told.
So here's an interesting concept from the Arizal that you're saying that the soul has clothing. In Hebrew it's called the levush, and there's like, you know, surrounding light and external light and these various concepts, but the idea is that the person's mother and father provide the clothing of the soul in a soul concept. So there's the material body that's, you know, the ultimate clothing of the soul, and that comes from the concept of klipa, the material body. But the clothing of the soul comes from the mother and father, but the actual soul comes from a transmigration. However, the transmigration is clothed within the soul of the mother and father, and you know, the Arizal system is a little bit sexist. You know, it claims that generally women don't reincarnate. That very rarely do women reincarnate. And then actually, I was telling Jennifer the sections about you know, men who are reincarnated into women, but according to the Arizal, that women don't reincarnate or much rarely, and the effect the mother has on a child, though, creates a certain soul, you know, like clothing, and that's probably related to the second commandment of God being angry, jealous God, who meets the sins of the fathers upon the children for 3 and 4 generations. That this concept of the garment of the soul from the parents includes the karma for 3 and 4 generations, so that the soul that could come from an incarnation of something completely different, you know, like Jennifer's soul came from a completely different part of the world, completely different bloodline that had basically no direct connection with her genetic material bloodline, that her
Oh
soul
gosh, you flatter me, Doovid. Oh, please stop.
that her soul
Stop.
is still clothed within the soul of her blood mother and father, and that has karmatic influence, or at least limitations over, you know, the essential soul that is clothed with inside the soul. So I was reading through the Arizal, thought it was an interesting explanation. If you want to hear like a little weird like homosexual thing too, there's a little interesting that the Arizal says that the punishment for being homosexual is being born into a woman. And then so this guy with this other person, other like rabbi, like rejected that and was like, well then, like, isn't the person still being guilty of homosexuality? So if the person was a man and committed homosexuality and then was punished by having his soul enter a woman, and then why wouldn't that be a continuation of homosexuality if it's a male soul within a female body? So it's interesting that the Kabbalists debated that.
Awesome. Yeah, again, John Doe, it comes back to your personal karma. So it's about what's your state of mind at the instant of, or the event of death. What were your core intentions at the event of death? And because your ability for your mind to change changes when you're no longer alive. And if you react to that in fear, well, you're going to have more loss of memory. That's going to sort of mix things up more, be more upsetting. So it's really a monkey mindset kind of thing.
So it's interesting that the Kabbalistic system is less caught up with the mindset at the time of death that might make sense for scientifically, or the Vedic system. The Kabbalistic system also mentions quite a bit the concept of mindset at death, but the concept that is this tikkun olam, in that there was some essential correction that the soul needed to do, and once that has been fulfilled, that the person has fulfilled the purpose that they were born for, and so to say, passed. So in that sense, that the mindset at death is irrelevant to the tikkun. That if a person fulfilled their function, and they don't have to come back again, no matter what their mindset is at death. Although the mindset at death still will have an effect, but that there is this greater tikkun. And so if you fulfilled your tikkun at 30, and so you could die, like if I filled my tikkun, I could die tomorrow. Fine, I don't have to come back. I could still live out the rest of my life, have a family, and have other karmatic effects. However, the essential purpose that I if I've done my tikkun, that will have more of an effect than my mindset at death. I'm not sure if that makes sense to your do you have in your understanding that there's this, like a tikkun, that's something that you were meant to accomplish, and that bears more weight than the mindset at death, or you could even interrelate them, that having fulfilled your tikkun is a permanent change, so that your mindset at death is permanently changed from the fulfillment of the tikkun.
It's usually structured in terms of like archetype fulfillment. It's like how well you lived up to what you could have been. And then the mindset is like a compressed shorthand, thin sliced. But the idea is that the impression at death contains all that subtle information, even if you're not consciously aware of it. It's just that, like, so you got a question like, how should I die? It's like, you should be in a mindset where you're not going to get cognitive dissonance, because the more of that, the more unpleasantness happens. That's the basic starting point. And then it's down to how well you understand cognitive dissonance in this life. So that's about it.
Yeah, I was thinking the cognitive dissonance when we talked to that guy, John, and he may or may not come on, and like, all of a sudden he's like, just like going on this rant against like Hitler, and like,
oh my God, that was painful. And then it turned into this big fight afterwards. He's like, it just felt like arguing with, I don't know. I just felt like I was back in high school.
Well, I mean, it wasn't painful. It was unpredictable to me, because, like I said, like like I lived in Jewish communities for years. Like like I've been basically lived years of my life almost exclusively with Jews. I'm used to these type conversations all day, every day. Like I could deal with it; doesn't bother me. But I was thinking the cognitive dissonance archetype, where the dissonance of a person, and it's going to relate to Trump derangement syndrome, is largely contained within one person. So saying like, I'm a Jew, I'm happy to be a Jew, I love being a Jew. Generally, being a Jew works out pretty good for me. I know there's like an element where there's people who don't like Judaism or like anti-Semitism or like the Holocaust or whatever these things, and will track that it was largely a cognitive dissonance because my life is completely centered around Judaism, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. So any questioning of Judaism is largely a form of cognitive dissonance. And to limit the cognitive dissonance, people will naturally put it into one figure. So it could be like Trump or like Hitler. So if you're a Jew, and basically it's coming down to defense mechanism, any attack on Judaism, and that like immediately like triggers Hitler. And saying like it's really just a cognitive dissonance.
Well, yeah, like at first I was like, look, you have to just restrict what you're saying to like questions about my teachings. And he's like, what is this 1920s Germany? And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And then later on, he's like, do you think I'm a Nazi? And I'm like, I can't follow this convo. It's just like,
well, it's actually really easy to follow. I mean, saying it's like, because it's like arguing about Trump. Saying it's his karma and his dissonance, and the way he's expressing his dissonance to you is through the language like Hitler and Nazi Germany. So if that causes dissonance for you, which I mean, okay, like if it's not even YouTube, you're not worried about censors, but saying like no, I mean like Hitler, Nazi Germany is like a topic of like 5% of my life. Like 5% of my life has been studying, talking about like Nazi Germany. Like I'm a Jew, like that topic's going to come up regularly. Just like I said, reincarnation. Like reincarnation came up pretty regularly. I was saying like but like no, like Nazi Germany came up a lot more often than reincarnation. And it's like yeah, that's a cognitive dissonance. Like that and especially for like even in your own model. It's just that I'm not, and I explained to John in the call using your model that I'm not safe, I'm not worthy, because really it's a question of person like I don't feel safe, I don't feel worthy, and so like if you're a Jew, you're like okay, I don't feel safe, I don't feel worthy. That's just like personified in like Hitler, because like well, why don't you feel safe? Why don't you feel worthy? It's because of Hitler. I mean, God forbid, but like saying that, so that really is just within your own model. I mean, I don't even see it should make sense to you even within your own model.
well, I said to him several times before we talked, Doooovid does not like flattery, and he does not like small talk. And if we're going to talk to him, you got to keep it to topical questions. And I do not feel that happened in the least. And I feel like several times I tried to guide the combo back to that, and it did not work.
Yeah, but that was a private conversation. I was saying the guy wants to talk online. I was saying like I don't like small talk in real life either. But I was saying like if the guy just wanted to talk or like like have a conversation, we could do it. And saying well, we spoke offline. That's different than online. And like I'm not much for small talk ever. But like you're saying like I could meet and talk to a person and I could feel his pain and like understand that wasn't necessarily problematic because we were talking offline. Or just saying if he did want to come on the show and go online, but at the same time, like every Jew could give a soliloquy on like how much they hate Hitler. God forbid, and the same. But like there's millions of Jews out there, and every time I meet a Jew, like I don't need to hear those soliloquy on like how much they hate Hitler. God forbid. So so it's just like limited. So the guy's coming on and he's like I'm a Jew and he really hates anti-Semites. And it's like, well, obviously, like, what are you telling me now? Like, do I really need to go through your hours of stories of why you hate anti-Semites? And you could really compare the guy John to like your buddy Patel and like Hindus. And you're saying like the dissonance, like no, that's normal. These topics come up all the time when you're dealing with Jews. Not saying like every Jew is guaranteed to like spurg out on these things, but saying it's more likely, but also like Indians, and because it's a question of identity, and when you meet new people and have conversations, you have to relate your identity to their identity, and most Jews, our identity is centered around the fact that we're a Jew. If you ask me my identity, being Jewish is a central aspect of my identity. That's similar for all Jews. So hence when Jews are meeting each other and we're trying to work around our identity, that's just how the consciousness works.
Aiken would like to know, who is the major theological Jewish personality who took Arizal's interpretation of the Kabbalah to its next steps in the 17th century?
Well, okay, the Arizal was kind of like a recluse sage who wandered in the forest and had a circle of students, like he would gather, for prayer. Like he'd show up for prayer, and then talk a little Torah, or on Sabbath, like have little study circles. But he wasn't known to like travel and do a lot. And even his students, he had a circle of students, but he didn't really build up students in that way. But his books, largely his teachings, became pretty universally accepted through Chaim Vital. And there's many different rabbis, saying Shabbatai Tzvi obviously is the biggest propagator of the Arizal's Kabbalah, but he's a false messiah, and in a negative way. There's a lot of other rabbis. So Chabad, the first Chabad rabbi was Schneur Zalman of Ladi, Rabbi Menachem Schneur Zalman Schneerson, who forms the Chabad movement, which 7 generations, the last Rebbe in America, and now as all the rabbis around the world. But the formulation of Chabad Hasidus was based on the Arizal's Kabbalah. There's another major rabbi called, I think, Rabbi Horowitz, from a book called Shnei Luchas Labris, the 2 Tablets of the Covenant, which is a Kabbalistic work written in like the 1650s. And that's also one of the big influences on the Chabad, the Babbage movement. But really, the Vilna Gaon, every major rabbi after the Arizal, like a few hundred years, generally, there are a few other schools of Kabbalah. There's the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cardova, the Palm Tree of Devora, Tamar Devora, that Henry Abramson's a big fan of. And it's a different understanding of Kabbalah. There are schools today that have different understandings of Kabbalah, slightly different permutations and takes. The Arizal was Sephardi, and there's differences in the prayers and the rituals in various things. So I'm not sure if you have interpretation, and then if you're looking at like I said, the banking. So the how the Arizal gets turned into the Dutch East India Company and the thinking about it. So you have major rabbis like Rav Yonason Eibschitz, and these names are slipping me, but some of these, it was like the chief rabbi in Amsterdam, that they get a hold of the Arizal's teachings, and they
Dr. Michael Laitman. That's what John Wolfe says.
Well, he's the modern Israeli guy, and like he's not really Orthodox or religious. He's kind of like a heretical Kabbalah scholar. And that's why I said like Shabbatai Tzvi, because like saying like the Lubavitch Rebbe never veered from the track. He always kept the law. The Arizal was known to be extremely meticulous in observance of the law. That there was no question, like Shabbatai Tzvi, the Arizal was as meticulous as possible and talked about the importance of being extra meticulous in observance of the law. So any of the major Jewish personalities who interpreted the Kabbalah, like the Lubavitch Rebbe, the Horowitz, the Vilna Gaon, were also extremely meticulous in the observance of the law. But there's a whole bunch, and they're splitting into schools, and the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov. There's the Or Chaim. There's names and names. Like I said, like every generation has multiple personalities. Some like personalities like the Arizal, he doesn't even necessarily stand out head and shoulders above his generation, because Joseph Caro, what like even his compatriots in Sfas, like the Arizal, does not even stand out above his compatriots who were in Sfas at the same time as him, because it was one of these things like ancient Greece, or maybe periods of Europe in the Enlightenment, or in America, Silicon Valley or tech centers, where you had exceptionally great souls together in the same time, in the same area, and that permanently changed Judaism. So the Arizal is not known to be greater than Yosef Karo. And he was saying Yosef Karo, in the creation of the Besdin and the rabbinic court, that the Arizal was not, from these major, he was from the circle of rabbis that recreated the rabbinic court. But no, he was not known as the greatest rabbi. He was not going to be put as the head of the Sanhedrin. There were other rabbis that were known to be even greater than the Arizal in his own town, in his own time.
Very interesting. Do you want to talk about a different subject?
I also want to mention, I talked about the Yechilma Paris debate in 1240 on Charles Moskowitz and Luke, and the burning of the Talmud and the censoring of the Talmud. And your question, like, how come reincarnation wasn't brought up? Because we know, and I don't know if you have any comment on that, we know that reincarnation, it was the time of the Cathars, and that reincarnation was something that could have been censored for, and we have this list of like all these things that were problematic about the Talmud, and certainly was Jesus boiling in excrement, or are the Jews loyal to society? But it's a question. Why wasn't the question, do the Jews believe in reincarnation? And so the scholars say because Jews didn't believe in reincarnation, it was taken in that time and introduced into Judaism. And then, but according to the scholars, like, why would the rabbis introduce reincarnation into the doctrine in like 800 years ago in Europe if it hadn't existed, when we knew that like we could have been even persecuted further for introducing that into our doctrine? So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
It seems just like a political thing, because, well, as you can see through our own experience, correctly interpreting the phenomenon of consciousness is it's really difficult, because you got to go through that whole 5 steps of axiomatic convergence, right? It's much easier. It's much more expedient just to say, no, we're not talking about that. That's my guess. It's like, how do you interpret it on such a subtle thing? I mean, that there's a couple of rules, but it's always bottlenecking at the person, like, I can tell you that it's going to be your final mind state that's going to be determinative of your karma. But if you don't spend any time, quote unquote, meditating or contemplating, well, you're not going to have very deep knowledge of yourself. And then it always bottlenecks at the person. That's the important thing. Most important bottleneck is from the spine to the brain, even though that's sort of an anti-bottleneck, but that's just how it goes in nature. Yeah, it's sort of reacting to the environment, all the way down to all the way from crabs getting the certain dimensions convergently to people having 5-minute spiels prepared of hysteria. I don't know if that answers your question or if that's too abstract. I'm playing our video from our appearance, which someone in the chat said was interesting.
You
What
want to
did you
show
think? Do you think that I was able to incorporate your suggestions meaningfully?
I'm not sure, because saying like the only way to tell is the reaction from the crowd, and I don't think we've had. We had like good show, like lesson. All thanked us, but did people actually walk away understanding the concepts, or was it just like, oh yeah, you're so smart, great show, thanks? I did notice there's like, I said like the Chabad near me is starting the class on death and is going to have a class on reincarnation. I saw a whole bunch of stuff this week on like Judaism and what happens after death. But can you put up the analytics from just put up Root and Branch, their YouTube page, and the number of views that they're getting? So like, it's too kind of subjective to say. I mean, I think you did better that you didn't like waste a whole bunch of time explaining some random scientific concept that doesn't really matter, because saying like no one really understands what you're talking about anyways. So so it's like, oh, what's that? And then you digress like 5 minutes explaining some concept, and it's like, did you get it? It's like, no. And so well, then the whole 5 minutes I just spent explaining it was wasted. It's like, well, yeah, basically. And so it's a very difficult thing in any of these topics talking about it. But just looking at the views, I mean, if you click on video, so you could see the difference in views. Lowell has a background in media. He's an interesting character. He's been around a while. He's had a whole bunch of incarnations of his different YouTube pages and co-hosts and programs, like Roseanne Barr and various things. And Root and Branch is an in-person speaker series that was actually in a major center, the Jerusalem Center in Israel. And, Les Glassman was recording them, putting it up on sometimes his page or other pages, mostly Les's page. And then only recently, like if you scroll down, you could see, kind of how recently they started putting these up on YouTube, largely due to COVID-19. And you just look at the numbers, like Roseanne Barr.
Just under 300 there.
Yeah, so even
That's
Roseanne Barr didn't garner like a huge amount of views, like the tradition of the Israelite origin of whatever, like 100 some, but most of these are only getting tens of views.
Oh no, look, 7.9K views.
Oh, yeah, so Roseanne Barr's Lithium, her first one that I was on.
The funny thing is the one right before it had 7 views.
Yeah, I mean, so these are just like random, like
just people pulling their own audiences, I guess.
Well, they're interesting people, but there's no, like even Lowell, like like Lowell's having a Doovid, I'm gonna have a conversation with my friend and put it on YouTube. Is like, does anyone want to watch it? And so, but if you look since we got them live, if you scroll back up to the most recent videos, say like they've only really gained like 10 subscribers, but like certainly their numbers have drastically increased, like almost.
Well, they've been doing this for a while. Like these are all uploads. That's important to remember, is that these are things that they did in real life and then uploaded them later.
But even seeing the
go
video,
back quite a ways, but you can see it's anywhere from like 10 to a couple hundred views.
Yeah, I mean, David Perry, shared it a whole bunch of times. The man from the Extremist Club who knew Claire. The most recent expert on Pseudostand, also over 100 views. So Lowell's got a pretty big network. I think he's got potential. I think we can get him over 1,000 subscribers. Just getting him live has already made a big difference in the viewership. And then maybe me and you being on the show promoting it, like he was at 318 subscribers. He hasn't went that much up in subscriptions. But I think
that's maybe something to mention to him, is to remind people, because I don't know if he's been doing that. Please subscribe to the channel. I don't think that's part of his standard shalom from Israel.
Yeah, and he's even like countdown from 10. But I mean, he's got an old-fashioned background in media, in media and journalism that isn't from the streaming era. But yeah, I think we could help him out, and he's got a pretty good network. And one thing, just to meet an international set of characters, saying we met the creator of the Extremist Club that had Claire speak in London, this guy in Missouri, on.
It is a pretty epic channel, isn't it? Like when that convo with that last one, the Mr. Fazal, that was
the
really
liberating Pashtunistan.
Yeah, it was very surprising that topic came up, and it was riveting for a time. You guys just jumped right into it. It was funny to see Lowell do it too. I never seen him so impassioned about something.
We should have Vince, because I mean, saying Lowell and Les are actively involved in the no hide movement. You don't have to keep on screen sharing it in, but I think we should talk about. We could also talk about the theoretical, like $10,000. What if they got $10,000? Like, how would we use it to help promote the channel? But if you think like Vince, this is what he's against. Lowell and Les are both actively promoting no hideism and
Vince thinks it's going to be decapitating Christians. Lowell and Les, that's probably not what they're thinking when they're promoting it. So I think it's really just some sort of a talking past each other, don't you?
Well, no, I mean, they haven't even talked to each other. So I'm saying, but I'm saying that a lot of the stuff Vince has mentioned, those people are on their YouTube pages. Those people have spoken at Root and Branch, and saying those are people that Les and Lowell are actively involved with. I was joking to Jennifer that like if they like pay her for her services, they're going to start monitoring her to make sure that she doesn't that she's a proper Noahide. That they're going to entice her into pretend like they're going to pay her for her services, and then they're really going to insist that she become a Noahide and start monitoring her, and like a Vince type thing. But it's like, no, they're actively promoting Noahidism. Their goal in doing this is to convert people to be Noahide compliant. That's actively one of the intentions of why they're doing what they're doing.
To me, it comes off as looking good for Israel.
Yeah, so I was saying that.
Is that not the intention? I mean, could it just be that?
Well, Hasbora and Noahidism are an overlap, but they're not the same thing. So I'm saying, yeah, they're also like Hasbora, but they're more Noahide than Hasbora. So like they want to make Israel look good and help Israel, but they also want to turn Goyim into Noahides. So and I think that's probably even more important than getting people to love Israel for what they're trying to do.
Because it just seemed like a showcasing of some of the talent.
Well, you're seeing some of the best in global Noahidism, that we're meeting some of the greatest global Noahides. That most of the people we're speaking to are Goyim, and they're relatively from a Noahide position. Like these are good Goyim. These are Noahide compliant Goyim who are promoting the Noahide laws.
All right. I never got that impression, but okay.
Well, I mean, because they're not necessarily saying that, but it's saying like, I mean, if you just look at their page, they have like all of these people on their page. Like that's who they're talking to. Like the guys who sacrificed the like lambs for the different nations. Like they have that on their page. Like they know those guys.
Okay.
And like all the stuff that Vince came on the show, like telling us about, like like these rabbis in Israel, like Lowell has them on their page, like he's talked to them. Even like just a few weeks ago, we even had like the head of the Sanhedrin, like the actual head of the rabbinic court that runs the Noahide movement, was on the show like 3 weeks ago.
Okay. So you want to bring Vincent on that channel?
Well, it might be interesting. Like Vince should, but I mean, no,
you must love conflict then.
Well, no, I mean, I'm pointing at conflict and saying that saying your person on a mission, and like conflict is saying like that's like a Tikkun or something like that. That like obviously like Vince is going to be won over, just like Lowell is convinced that Adam Green is going to convert and become a rabbi. So that's the,
Oh yeah, that's right. That is what he said, isn't it? That was like the first time we ever talked to him, wasn't it?
Well, he used to tweet me. That's how I found him. Like he quoted me on the show, and when he saw me on Adam Green, and he called me out. He thought I was like a bot rap, and he tweeted at me. That's how I found him. And then when I added him on Facebook, I guess he added you because like I don't think I even mentioned you to him. Like he just reached out to me because he saw me on Adam Green. I think he added me on Facebook, and then he saw I was posting Week in Review, and I think out of his own accord, he friended you without even asking me about it. I'm pretty sure that's how it worked.
Cool.
And that, telling about his personality too, that he just friended me, and then he saw that I was streaming with you, and out of his own accord, without like asking me first, just friended you. Which like he didn't need to ask me, can I friend this person? But but it's telling about his personality.
Yeah, outreach type. Hey, Roger Perlman, if you want to come back on, you should, and we can chat. I don't know what happened before, but yeah, we didn't say hi. I think we were just super caught up in our combo. Oh, John Wolf says he found me first. Well, you get to wear the crown of that, I guess. Take from that what you will.
Yeah, but we could also do a brief. We don't have to ramble forever because, like, now I'm streaming so often. Like, yeah, I was telling Claire and this guy like Paul, to just call Charles Moskowitz. Like he's taking calls, and Claire was like, give me the link. Like book me on. Said, just call the number. So we should probably get that set up at some point too. Just like a call-in number, that might make more sense. But I think Charles, that might be good.
Number. I can just put the Google Meet.
No, I think a call-in number is probably better. And say even Roger.
About a call-in number is just more work for me. Right now, I have the equivalent of a call-in number.
No, I'm saying call-in number is easier for people than Google. That or even a Zoom.
What could possibly be easier than somebody going ding dong in the existing already meeting? I mean, would you be calling in too? No. I just put the link in the chat.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't matter, but I mean, I think.
Well, we can have a call-in period for the show as long as people don't get moronic and try to raid the thing, which they tried already, and it gets boring eventually. Just
this show's probably not set up like that. It's probably never going to grow like that, and it might be okay like that because it's not generally about it's more you're putting people to work and teachings and serious study that isn't like a larger audience. But like Charles having the call in, I think that's good. And I was just encouraging the people, at least, just like, like call in, especially like the people like Claire is like, but yeah, Roger came because I was almost ready to call it a week or let me edit 2 hours. But like if Roger wants to talk and I'm saying, I think I'm doing more work in some extent. Like Luke mentioned, it takes a lot of work to put together a good show. And like, if Roger wants to talk about, streaming, like Roger is his own accomplished grown man. He's got a family. He's author of books. But in terms of like what it takes to be a good streamer, navigating the technology, the sound issues, the all those issues, and then just thinking about communication theory combined with the most recent technology, where you're saying like, okay, you have something valuable to offer and tell people. But who exactly is your target audience, and how do you reach them, and how do you communicate it? How do you network with other people? And maybe that's Yesh Chachma B'Goyim. That's wisdom Goyim. But if Roger's here, if you don't mind, I'll take 5. And did you have something for me right away, Roger? Or I'll take 5 and talk with Jennifer. I'll be back in like 5-10 minutes, unless you had something to say to me right away.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, Jen.
Maybe we
Can
can.
you still?
Maybe we
Okay,
can.
yeah, we'll talk to you soon, Doovid.
Okay.
All right, good.
So thank you so
Yes,
much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time. Did you have any thoughts you wanted to share with us?
yeah, one thing I was working on while you were talking, I was trying to place Pythagoras. Is that how would you pronounce the guy's name? I don't speak Greek, so.
I don't either, and I have a feeling that I have a feeling I've been pronouncing that word wrong my whole life. So I'm not even going to venture a guess. But what I'll do while you're talking is I'll actually look it up, and we can see what the internet says.
Oh, okay. How to pronounce it? Oh, you can get the pronunciation. Okay, yeah, I guess. Yeah, so I was looking up the chronology because when I was looking him up on, it didn't seem to be clear where he got his ideas from. Obviously, he could have thought of everything on his own that he thought of, but that's rare. Normally, you get your ideas, at least the seeds from them, from somewhere, and they did credit him with being a big influence on Plato and cities. So the way I figured, under the Torah discovery chronology, where there are a lot of replications, duplications during that era, in that area. Yes, he probably got his ideas indirect from Jeremiah. The way I have it, there's the myth, which may have truth to it, that Plato learned from, a young Plato learned from Jeremiah, may have met him directly. And that actually, that chronology can work out under the tighter Torah discovery chronology, but in old Solon, one of the 7 sages of Greece, who met King Croesus, before Croesus fell to Cyrus, the famous Solon, by King Croesus of Sardis, when it fell to Cyrus about a few years before the fall of Babylonia to Cyrus.
From what I've heard, Pythagoras basically was like a bit of a cosmopolitan sort of traveler. And so he appears to have drawn his influences from many places. It is unclear to me, due to my own shortcomings of knowledge of history, where he may have sourced the Orphic hymns, if indeed he is responsible for penning them, which is a speculative theory, but it is a popular theory in history that Pythagoras is ultimately, him or his school originated what are known as the Orphic hymns, which later became, again, and I'm rusty on this, somehow integral to Christianity. But I do know that the Pythagorean theorem, the x squared plus y squared equals r squared, the Pythagorean theorem, that is something from the Shalba Sutra.
Okay, which is in India, or where is that?
That'd be considered. That would be considered like I mean, technically, I don't even know what you'd call it, but it's like a teaching or their version of math, I guess.
Oh, the East.
Yeah, so there is already something called the Baudhayana Sutra, which is the same thing. So it's attributed, that particular teaching is attributed to him in India, but his other beliefs, he does really seem to be quite multifaceted in terms of his influences. Like, have you read the Orphic hymns? They're
no, I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, they have a certain tone to them that's a bit hard to place. I would really need to study up more history on that particular era, because there's just so many complexities of culture and beliefs, and it's also it gets speculative at some point. But ultimately,
right. Well,
Pythagorean approach, basically, Doooovid is making an argument that and I think I agree with him, that there's like a central approach to these, what you could call natural sciences, that transcends them.
Okay.
Yeah, so That's sort of one of the topics we were getting onto, and also why everything turns into a crab after a while.
So anyway, Jeremiah ended up in Egypt after the destruction of the first holy temple. And he was very, just like Moses was very highly regarded in Egypt before the Exodus by the people of Egypt, perhaps not by the Pharaoh of Egypt. So too, Jeremiah was very highly regarded. He had predicted that Babylonia would come down and defeat Egypt, which I think was, I have the reign year of when Nebuchadnezzar actually did. And so even before Cyrus and Cambyses too, his son, would be down there, Nebuchadnezzar had led the way for the Babylonian Empire, which led to the Mede and Persian Empire to get down there. So Jeremiah was a big influence on the wise of the sages of Egypt. And those sages of Egypt were a big influence on the Greek sages of, the wise men of Greece. So it's a good chance. Well, almost for sure, he must have known about Solon, who was very famous in Greece.
Yeah, I was going to
Pythagoras
say
got around.
you can pinpoint Jewish influence in Greece as early as Solon. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So that's actually a great example.
Yeah, so that was probably via Jeremiah, because Jeremiah and the whole big Jewish community, after the assassination of Gedaliah, went down to Egypt. And so they had a big influence down there. And so that went to Solon, who brought a lot of that back to Greece. And Pythagoras was, a little bit of overlap. He was, I think, well, according to the consensus, he was only about 10, but I suspect he was much older when Solon passed away. There is a lot more overlap than people are aware of between from Solon, Pythagoras to Socrates, Plato, and a bunch of people during that period. So Herodotus. So, but anyway, so maybe David knows anything in Jeremiah that that you can detect in the may have had to do with reincarnation and the immortality of the soul that may have influenced indirectly Pythagoras.
I'm not familiar with the writings, to be honest, so I have no idea.
Oh.
I see
Yeah,
reincarnation is kind of like it's like a primordial belief in a way. And it all sort of ties to like how people understand consciousness and death. And so it's always kind of looming in the background. So I think it's almost, to say that someone got that idea from someone else, like I don't know, I think it's just sort of, I don't want to say inborn, because obviously some people deny it, but you sort of get preoccupied with questions about, the soul and consciousness and meaning and so forth.
Yeah, well, David meant, you're saying that it didn't come up till, more recently in Jewish tradition, I guess.
No, I think the latter day idea is that there is no reincarnation. That's the later idea. So that idea came about, like, I'm not sure exactly when, but the judgment is separate from reincarnation. That's like a very recent phenomenon, and that's unclear where that came from.
All right, so in the book of Jeremiah, would there be anything that might hint to reincarnation being implicit? For example, I know in the Talmud, it says, it's not explicit. For example, the afterlife is not, well, it is, there are hints to it. It doesn't go out and talk about it a lot.
Well, the
but it's
Vedas
implicit.
don't talk about reincarnation a lot either.
Yeah, right. So they don't talk.
They don't talk about
they don't
it
really talk
because
a lot.
It's like a corpus of knowledge. It's what people decided was the most important things to know. And I think reincarnation is something that we as a civilization maybe haven't been mature enough to acknowledge yet.
Right. So I'm just saying that even in the old traditions, like in the Talmud, where they say like anybody who doesn't believe in the afterlife is, wrong, flat out wrong, because, and then the different sages disagree, like, which
No, it
verses
just
in
wasn't discussed because every
Scripture.
explanation of that phenomenon that you're alluding to right now is going to sound different depending on when it's explained. So like our ability to have this conversation right now and access to all the words that we have, at our fingertips wouldn't have even been possible 50 years ago. You can go back and read the sort of stuff people used to say 50 years ago and it's not the same, right? So the language is always going to be different because you're kind of answering a question that's really, really complicated, which is like, what is consciousness, pretty much? And the answer always is going to sound different
Right, but
depending on what you actually have to describe it.
Right, but even the first person could have been thinking about it. It's like great minds think a lot alike. So,
Well, everything is coming from
in my
consciousness.
view,
Everything is
okay.
coming from thinking.
Okay.
That's that's built
So
into it.
So, right, so man has probably been thinking about that from the beginning of time, and since great minds think alike in every generation, there are probably going to be people who are thinking about it. So I'm just was wondering if Jeremiah, if there's anything in Jeremiah that may have hinted to it. Not that he wrote down everything that he was lecturing about. It's not like he had everything on, all his lectures recorded. We only know, we know him from what he is, Jeremiah, and maybe some other extraneous works. So I just thought David may have known something about the book of Jeremiah that may have tied in, or you might know. Like you mentioned, Salon had some Hebrew influence on him. So that, yeah. I think Plato too. I forget how Jeremiah and Plato tie in, but I've seen something where where Plato had some ideas that seem to come from Jeremiah.
Yeah, I really honestly haven't studied it enough to comment on it. I wish I could comment more, but like I don't like to make generalizations when I haven't studied something well enough. I do not know what right now. My gosh.
Yeah.
So much,
Okay. Yeah. I don't see the chat
so much
when I'm on
talk
this.
in the chat.
Monday. Yeah. So, yeah, a couple of things I asked in the chat early on. I'm sure you've dealt with it before. So, I think everybody agrees that, genetically we all probably come back from a maternal Eve. That means there was there had to be an ultimate founding atom, and then there's a genetic bottleneck. I think that's pretty well
agree with that.
known. So the genetic bottleneck.
I have a model of quantum evolution, and it actually makes the predictions. So my model basically predicts that a quantum state transition will happen, and after that point, every other newborn to that species will become a different species, basically, which is not able to procreate with the mother or that type of animal that created it. So
okay, so how many humans
transition happens due to a saturation, and that's how my model predicts evolution. So I'm not in favor of a mitochondrial Adam and Eve because there would have been a spontaneous generation within a very short time period, which would have quote unquote devoured the prior species, but it would have been like basically like giving birth to something that wasn't the same species as you, as scary as that must have been. But yeah, there would be any because the biomass is what's reincarnating. It's not just one entity that's reincarnating, it's the full biomass. So there would be all these new entities or different entities within this new species upon the event of speciation.
Okay, so how many species of humans are there now? One or more than one? Are we all one species?
Oh gosh, it
I hope,
depends. It
what,
really did. Like this is a really politically charged issue, so people kind of like to redefine the terms.
okay.
In terms of what you can say is that there is what you call a last universal common ancestor of humans,
Okay.
and we're reasonably certain that arose in Africa.
Okay, so wherever
And
it arose.
whatever this species looked like would not be something we would recognize as human today. I don't think it would be like human-ish, you know, like if the recipe for a human was to put it in a microwave oven and like you're supposed to put it in for 2 minutes, but you'd only put it in for 90 seconds, right? So it's like a half-baked human. Sorry to sound, I hope this isn't rude or anything, but there would be something which appears to have arisen in Africa, which makes total sense because it's like the most vegetation dense, birds tweeting, sort of like Garden of Eden, if you can think of something like that. There's some quite, regularly tropical regions there. So this would be before
Right.
what we
Well,
know
I
as
think
civilization. Now,
that it happened
sorry?
before.
Sorry, you're kind of cutting out. You might want to just turn
So
off
there
your...
wasn't.
Sorry,
separate
Roger, you're kind of cutting out. You might
continent
just want to
Africa.
just turn off your video because it seems like it's not
Yeah.
able to handle it.
But that's beside the. So how many of those?
Yeah, like if you were downloading courses, for example, like the great courses.
So how many proto? How many proto?
You're not coming through at all, Roger. We can't hear what you're saying. And what Jennifer is saying, like like the data transfer of the video is exponentially larger than the audio. So we're not hearing your audio, and it could be because your bandwidth isn't big enough. But I'm saying, so if you just click and you turn off your camera, it's likely to solve the issue because your camera feed takes up substantially more data. Okay, so see if. Oh, but now he dropped the call. So you have to figure out his tech or
so
walk.
Roger, if you want to come back, all you have to do is turn off the video on the Hangout window, and that will make it so that hopefully there's enough bandwidth for all the audio. Because it
probably would have worked. I mean, say that's the most easy and likely thing that would have solved the issue. But we really just couldn't hear what you were saying. You were talking, but it wasn't coming through.
Yeah, so they're saying that the audio is breaking intermittently. Hopefully that is not a permanent issue, but thank you for bringing it to our attention. Yeah, he was asking about Jeremiah and where and if there are allusions to reincarnation there. And I was saying that even in the Veda, there's not much allusions to reincarnation because it's abstract and the popular lexicon jargon changes generationally, so that the teachings wouldn't make sense even a couple generations later because there'd be like a new lexicon or whatever.
Well, I mean, he was asking you about Hebrew scripture. He was wanting you to explain to him Hebrew scripture.
Yeah, and I said I just didn't have enough information. I was hoping you'd come back before he hopped off.
Yeah, I mean, the reality
maybe he'll come back on.
I mean, the Zohar is a commentary on scripture. So, I mean, the Zohar is not. The Arizal, the Chaim Vital is more like scientific. It's written in basic, like Euclidean form. The Eitz Chaim is largely written in a Euclidean format of axioms and conclusions. And also the Ramchal, later Italian Kabbalist that I did my series on, also is largely written in Euclidean form. But the Zohar is written as commentary on scripture. So, if you wanted to know the understanding of Jeremiah. You would just go to the Zohar commentary on that, and and if there was reincarnation, the Zohar usually like is straight up says this. That's the type commentary that you find in the Zohar, and that's why I say like the Zohar. So let's see if Roger.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you're clear now. So
I didn't know that.
That's why I
Okay.
said the video feed really takes like 10 times more, even like 50, 100 times more bandwidth than the audio. So usually turning off the video if you're having bandwidth problems, like usually even if you have pretty low bandwidth, that's enough to have voice.
Are you there, Roger? We can't hear you. Hello?
Yeah, I didn't know there's Zohar on Jeremiah. That's interesting.
I don't know. I don't even have a copy of the Zohar. I'd have to look that up. So if there's not Zohar in Jeremiah, like I mentioned, Shnei Lukas Abris, the Shla Kodesh, or even the Maharal, or any of these, the Malbim, any of the Kabbalist commentators that commented on that, that would be likely in their commentary, and that's why I mentioned, even like Roger, even if you had never really thought, what's the role of reincarnation in Judaism, through just generic Jewish scholarship that you've read hundreds of Jewish books, maybe thousands of Jewish books, that reincarnation is basically everywhere. If it's like the Malbim's commentary on some, prophet, like it probably includes reincarnation, right? Even like Proverbs. So like that's something that a lot of people have studied, and a lot of the verses in Proverbs are interpreted to apply to reincarnation, and that's even in like mainstream Hasidic commentaries, that even like Art Scroll commentary on like Ethics of the Fathers, and various things, like talks about reincarnation. Even Rashi, I think, mentions it a few times. I have to look up. I'm not a big enough scholar to point this out. But I mean, Jennifer doesn't even know, most of these names, or if she does, it's basically from hearing me talk about it on Week in Review. And these names might be mildly interesting to her, but they're, largely only interesting to her because of their opinions on reincarnation.
Oh, it looks like he's left the meeting. Yeah, I think he's just having internet problems. That's too bad. Yeah, so I don't know if want to talk about the crab again. I don't know if that was clear before to people, but yeah, there's a thing called the measurement limit, and it applies to all the systems. You just have to know how to interpret it. And in this case, you got 3 + 1 per side of the crab's body, and within those 8 limbs and 2 forward limbs, you have this fundamental, I don't know what you want to call this crab light body, which is restrained through its physical body, its exoskeleton, and then it moves around by vibrations of that waveform. And it has 2 states of mind. So hopefully that makes sense.
Did you mention that? What was that phylogeny recapitulates? I forget.
Well, he was just saying that he believes in mitochondrial Eve, and I said I don't think it works like that, in the sense that there's a single common ancestor. There'd be
phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny.
I don't know
right?
what that means.
Devaya, when he was on, mentioned it. Phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny.
I'm looking it up now. Okay, this is the first time hearing this. So,
No, we
oh,
talked
the
about
idea
this
that it goes through. Okay, yeah, I remember now that it goes through all the different stages.
in the chat, but it's saying that the crab there is, I think, one of the fetal forms and part of the phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny theory, that the crab is, I think, possibly part of that theory.
I don't know. I don't remember any crabs. It more looked like a crumpled up sort of dinosaur bird thing. And a monkey. Hard to tell. They're sort of amorphous. Yeah, so here's a bunch for, chickens, but like, I don't know how strongly that theory is supported because they're basically like amorphous blobs, aren't they? Hello? I haven't really looked into this theory. These diagrams are not super compelling, are they? I thought there'd be a more compelling one.
Yeah, I don't see anything connected between the crab also, but I mean, I guess the concept of
No, the crab is a different vector. It's a complementary phase space to us. It has an exoskeleton. We have an endoskeleton. So.
I guess you could, if the phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny theory is true, either all of them would have the same form. So, like, if the fetus does go through all those various recapitulations, that the essential archetype form is the same in all of those, or the pardon me, or the recapitulation process would shuffle through the various forms. So it's not just a recapitulation of different permutations of the same form, but would be a recapitulation of, even potentially all the forms.
Yeah, I guess the idea is some sort of fundamental root form.
And I mean, so phylet. I mean, this is where Luke and Brundle, they didn't have the abstractive thought ability, like when I was talking about K-Mac's group evolutionary strategy, even though I don't believe in evolution. So now I'm doing the same thing with phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, which is a concept of evolution, and it's saying because it's coded for in the genetics, and the genetics has the source code of the previous genetic lines that existed before humans, and therefore the fetus goes through the various forms, that I was mystifying the concept and misapplying it because it's a material concept related to existing code in the DNA that's not coded for humans, but theoretically contains the previous genetics of these things that come out during the formation phase of the fetus. So I was saying maybe on a spiritual level, in terms of forms, that the same process is taking place. I'm saying Jennifer with high powers of abstraction probably didn't even have to think twice to understand what I was doing. But I think that's comparable to the point where Luke Ford, that ability of abstraction was appeared to be beyond him.
It's because he doesn't understand evolution in the first place. I mean, if you understood evolution, you'd realize how wrong it is. All you have to do is look at the evidence. You have to have a lot of faith to believe that evolution happens by natural selection, like they say it does. I mean, why was, this little mystical root archetypal tadpole thing? How does that, It doesn't. It's not changing. That's the whole idea. It's like, yeah, you're saying it changes over time. And this is proof it's not really changing over time. Fundamental archetype. It's always recapitulating to the fundamental archetype. So, I mean, there's a foundational misunderstanding and misapplication of logic. So, of course, he can't defend it. What's he going to defend? He hasn't thought it through. Like, even half the biologists haven't thought it through. That's why they can't entertain my theory, because they're too busy trying to get their heads around natural selection and randomness.
So, I mean, do you agree with my abstraction that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny is probably a false scientific theory, but it could have a spiritual parallel that's largely true?
Well, I mean, what's the theory? Let's see here. Hypothesis stated that the embryonic stages of an animal reflect its evolutionary history. That doesn't sound wrong to me. Why is that wrong?
I'm not sure that I mean, because evolution's wrong that we didn't.
Well, the interpretation of evolution is wrong, but things still.
No, I'm saying that we don't derive from lower species. That I reject that part of evolution. So it's saying that the phylogeny recapitulation is of the lower life forms that we derived from. So they're saying no, that's factually incorrect. It's scientifically inaccurate because we do not derive from these lower life forms. That's not what's happening.
I suppose you could use these findings to argue against evolution. I'm not sure that that's what you're alluding to, but
Well, I mean, so the proposers of the theory is that, you know, the majority of DNA doesn't code for anything, and it's a question what it's there for. That you know, that there's, I forget the percentage, maybe 30, 40%, maybe it's less, of DNA that's coded, and the rest is likely, according to evolutionists, to be remnant strands of earlier incarnations. And so I reject that as incorrect. It's not what they are. There is no remnants of previous incarnation, though. That's inaccurate. That you know, whatever process of previous incarnations that they're proposing is inaccurate. Although in terms of what happens with the fetus, it's possible that the fetus does go through a recapitulation like that, even though it's not a parallel to human evolution. And then on a spiritual level, to say that there could be a spiritual progression of forms similar to the concept of phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. But, like, you know, I have to put my foot down and say, no, it's fundamentally an incorrect theory, because
that's the thing. The data
that's not the
doesn't-
origin.
data-
That's not the origin of humans. Like
The
that's-
data supports a creation hypothesis.
Yeah, but just Luke Ford
So
and the
if you
dangers
look
of
at the data-
e-personality. If he's
Whoops. I went to the wrong screen. If you look at the data, it's saying that there's a fundamental archetype that every animal derives from, and that suggests all these archetypes could have been created at the same time. So this evidence really doesn't point to evolution. This evidence points to creation. That's why all the prototypical things are looking very similar. So I can argue just as, I'm not saying I agree with that position. I'm saying this data is actually easier to use to substantiate a creation hypothesis than an evolution hypothesis. It's not evolving. There's no evolution. To look at these basic little tadpole things, and they're all so similar to each other, right? Like strikingly similar, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that not kind of seem more like a creation type thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, whoever came, I mean, I have to look at who came up with the phylogeny recapitulate phylogeny theory. Like the chart, the patterns are strikingly clear. The interpretation of the evidence, or what the pattern means, me and Jennifer are interpreting differently, but, like, I'm still applauding the effort and the data they collected and even how they organized the data. just not their conclusions or even their frame, that they use the frame of evolution to organize and interpret the data, and that was their flaw in the first place, that they were using an incorrect frame. But it doesn't take away from, quite a bit of, like an obvious accomplishment that you could just look at the chart and see that there's some level of truth and meaning here, even if they're, framed it, interpreted it wrong.
Well, it just sort of makes me baffled that this didn't motivate a creation hypothesis, because to me, this supports a creation hypothesis. Like, if they were all different, then that would mean they didn't have a common origin, but they're also similar. That doesn't that have a common origin, i.e., were created at the same time? So,
No, this is a somewhat a supportive evolution. Like, if you were listening,
but how does this support evolution exactly? How?
Evolution, but the process. So I'm saying, if you take, even not disputing that the process of evolution is possible in terms of change over time, but the cosmology of evolution, of the origin of species, specifically humans, and the origin of the world, where like fish had enough mutations that it turned into salamander to or turtle to a chicken to a rabbit to a human, or whatever transmigration, like evolution that led the one species leading to another, that we all know the theory. So if you're saying, what the evolutionists are saying is that the evidence that occurred is in the DNA, and even more so, that the evidence that occurred is in a visual process of how an embryo turns into a fetus. And that literally the ontogeny, meaning the code in the DNA that was left from these previous incarnations, recapitulates phylogeny. Phylogeny, like being the form. And so because factually that I don't know why I have to propose the argument, but I'm saying it's an extremely well-structured, logical argument that is saying that man did come from lesser life forms, and their DNA is still present in our DNA. And so when the embryo forms into a species, it blatantly recapitulates these forms in a way that, like, you could just look at the picture and see, like, yes, the embryo is remodeling these earlier forms. So saying, like, this is definitely, like, Jennifer, if you want, you could, like, rebut and try to argue against evolution. But, like, I would say that phylogeny recapitulates phylogeny is one of the stronger arguments in favor of evolution, even though, like, I would rebut it, but like, it's probably in the top 5, top 10 proofs of evolution.
Roger says it supports one common designer, not one evolutionary tree, more like an orchard of founding kinds, so micro, not macro evolution. That's interesting. Yeah, I think it alludes to a common archetypal norm behind all these little, I don't know what you want to call them, tadpoles. There's
evolution
an archetype that exists beyond them, that dictates each of their forms, that transcends all of them. That's all that really says.
On a factual level, that in some perspective, evolution gives a better understanding of this than creation, because the concept is that only a small percentage of the DNA codes, and the rest of the DNA is completely useless. And so evolution is saying that you're right, that DNA is completely useless. And the reason why it's there is because it's a remnant from previous forms, just like the appendix. That he's saying the appendix serves absolutely no function. It's a vestigial organ from a previous incarnation, and the only reason it's there is because it's a vestigial leftover remnant of a previous incarnation. So he's saying that's why it's an argument. So if you're taking a creationist view, you're saying like, no, that DNA is not useless, even though it doesn't code. So then the burden, so the evolutionist shifted the burden of proof on to the creationist, and so the evolutionist said like, no, that DNA doesn't code and it's useless and it's just a remnant of evolution. So evolution has explained why only a small percentage of the DNA codes. So you're saying as a creationist, you're saying everything was created perfectly, and the evolutionists saying like, no, everything was not created perfectly, nowhere near. Most of the stuff is just completely random. Basically, everything is just completely random within the realm of physical laws, and the evidence does not point to design. The evidence points to random processes that led to this messed up situation that we're currently in, and it's not even messed up because it's random anyways.
Right. So who's right?
What I was saying, so the phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny is
The random one.
is possibly a plus on the side of evolution. And saying like,
Yeah.
I'm not.
I don't think it is, but I get it.
I'm admitting that if someone was trying to argue against me, like I'm someone who argues against evolution, and like JF didn't bring up phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, but I was saying that yeah, like if I was arguing against evolution and someone, be prepared that you could expect someone would bring this up, and you might have to rebut it because it could be a point of saying like, like you're crazy. There is no creationism. Like there is no perfect creation. Like most of the DNA, serves absolutely no purpose. It was not, like we have vestigial organs that do not help us. They hold us down. Like there was no perfect creator that designed this stuff.
Well, there can be flaws and a perfect creator. Because the perfect creator, if people don't believe in the perfect creator, just point them to the quantum periodic table and say, well, I have more evidence of this perfect creator than anything else being imperfect. So that's my basis of understanding is this perfect creator. And then things that are in the gross realm, material realm, ultimately derive from this perfect creator, but are in different states.
Yeah, and really, you don't want to waste a bunch of time. That's why you need the multiple truth hypothesis, because you say like, well, what's truth? How do you analyze? How do you set a standard?
Well, that's why I made that hierarchical thing. I'm hoping it applies to everything. Do you understand the way that I thought it out though? Because I want to make sure you actually understand it. The one that's like the black one, where there's like a canonical chunker where you keep talking, it's on the level of like the non-dualism versus dualism. And then
yeah, so I would just putting it in if you have like a chart geometric representation, that in a mathematical representation it would be a weighting factor, and different things would have a different weighting factor, and that if you're trying to
this isn't a weighting factor. This is like a sequential multiplication, because you have canonical chunker, and if there's 2 in the canonical chunker and there's 5 in the elemental chunker, well, that makes 10 eigenstates.
Well, I mean, it's exponential growth, but
it's blah times blah times blah times blah, and you have to basically agree on everything down to the school to have meaningful exchange of information.
Yeah, I mean, you could have exponential weighting factors. I'm saying just because it still could be reduced to an equation form. I mean, like like ax to the first plus bx to the ax to the whatever, like an equation form, where each variable would have a weight and exponential representation.
Yeah. it's microstates that you're calculating. So it's a single computation, and you get to that point by multiplying the canonical complexity of every single thing, because every single reasoning goes through this entire, whether people realize it or not, every single thing that gets reasoned out goes through all this. So you can actually calculate the entropy or relative entropy of different thoughts. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, or you could better structure and manipulate information to know where, or ideas to know where they fall. And when you're talking with somebody, when you're trying to have a productive conversation, and you'll create some sort of growth, and saying what are the difference in axioms, where do our differences lie, to what point in the support structure that so if you're from this school, we might be able to derive that there's going to be disputations and different interpretations on thousands of different topics, and we could go through tens of different topics and then determine, oh, you're from this school, and so it's an efficiency level organizational structure that if you're taking like a scientific Kabbalistic create some sort of template, like this is a representative of material reality, or like just a mental technique that Jennifer's just introducing a mental technique, or saying this is a representative structure of how reality actually operates, or like a Doooovidism, where you're saying we don't really know objectively how reality operates, so the best we could do is something like a multiple truth hypothesis to analyze the various possibilities or interpretations for how reality might really operate.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm trying to set up here, is a way to have a more meaningful dialogue. I guess so step one would be to like understand why people are having misunderstandings. And it's like, okay, you don't agree on axioms. Okay, so where do we go from there? And then from that point, it would be pretty cool to like build arguments out of it, because I think I mentioned it earlier in the chat that the axioms of cosmology are space and time. And they're really hard to use. It's kind of like juggling knives, but they're really effective. And when you're using that type of dualism, right, which means that space and time are your axioms, or your elements, sorry. So there's nothing other than that. So everything's got to be in those terms. So it's a very challenging thing, but I promise it works. And yeah, I think it'll be a help get information out of things that have seemed esoteric in the past. Like give people a new interest in learning about religion, because you get this whole like meta-analysis layer on top of it. Like sort of a understanding how people thought back in the day.
Yeah, so in Talmudic literature, the Talmud usually uses the structure avos and banim, fathers and sons. Like, for example, Baba Kama, which is the Talmudic tractate on damages, like tort law. It starts at Arba Avos Nizikim. These are the four categories of damages. And then it lists the categories, and then you have the sons of the categories that are derivatives from that category, or like the laws of Sabbath, where you have 39 main category of forbidden type work on the Sabbath. And then there's the derivative sons of, so just an organizational structure that there's fathers and sons, and the fathers come from the son. I mean, the sons come from the father, and categorically, it's an important understanding to talk about things. And if you have, 5 different layers or however you structure it. So when say, what does it mean that people are talking past each other? It's, like a category error where, saying like Jennifer is like, talking about recipes and holistic health or something, and Johnny like keeps on bringing up Hitler. Is like, what's so it's like a categorical error where whatever reason the information or data is being interpreted or put in a different category, and it puts up a mismatch in data because the trigger of the information that the person sent to the other person, like from a communication theory, did not mirror the correct categorization that the person who sent the message intended and the receiver. And so like the person from communication theory, you can't blame the victim, meaning the person who didn't understand the message, it wasn't their fault. So it's like the message that it's a reciprocal relationship between the message sender and the message receiver. And there's the black box problem is that you never really know if the other person really understands what you're saying. Like it's always relative. There's a measurement limit to how much you could know whether the other person really understood what you said. So that's the important mental for yourself. Someone wants to be a good thinker and a good communicator, versus like Jennifer or Doooovid, who are actually trying to propose scientific theories about how these processes factually work.
Yeah, and that's why this hierarchical, nested, however you want to look at it, Russian dolls type of approach is really important, because the people who come learn with me, like, I think it's a bit of a shock to sort of realize that you have to go through this process of justifying your axioms and purging beliefs that are counterproductive. And that probably sounds intimidating, but that's what you're signing up for is, oh crap, I wish I was, having a better state of mind. Okay, I'm obviously believing something incorrectly. Please correct me, So that's what it is. It's a process going back to that foundational axiom. Like, what's your foundational axiom? Are we on a non-dualistic or dualistic framework? Because that's going to change everything. And if people can't constrain themselves to that framework, then there's no possibility of giving them the information. So, yeah, it's
well, it could be
in and of itself. What I'm hoping is it's a cookie cutter. It's an archetype for every single argument works this way, no matter what the system is. If it's dualistic, if it's non-dualistic, if it's like yours is basically infinitely many axioms. So it would incorporate all of those. It's just the structure of how thoughts are formed and how many axioms are actually invoked. Because you could argue that everything before the final step is a quote axiom.
What means that your diagram there is important because there's no ego. So in the sense that you have communication theory, there is no ego to, so to say, be correct or incorrect or have made a mistake or not making a mistake. There's sense perception, and then there's qualia processes that take that sense perception and turn it into a conscious experience. So if there's, so to say, a mistake that the person who sent the signal intended a different conscious experience than the one that was received, that if you moralize, you're implying free will. So you're saying that there may have been zero free will, that the person sent a signal and it was received and interpreted, and from a scientific perspective, the likelihood is no, the person did not have some free will decision making, that they could have either been good and interpreted the information wisely, or bad and interpreted the information poorly. That that's like a Hindu Kabbalistic moralizing perspective, but the scientific perspective, like there is no free will, there is no moralizing. It's a signal. The brain categorized it, and it was received, and there was no decision. There was no like ego that was able to step in and change the natural way that the brain receives and categorizes the signal. And then he said, but there is a chunking method that over time through trial and error, the brain could be rewired and information could be reinterpreted, and that's through the process of dissonance. Because if you currently have a circuitry that interprets information incorrectly, it's going to produce bad results. And so
we actually have a range of error, though. Like, we can do what we can do as quantum computers because we can work within a large error range. So it's completely possible to have beliefs that do not line up with reality. What is logical to have happen is that the beliefs that require the least energy to uphold will be upheld by the largest proportion of people. Those they're not necessarily going to be totally accurate, but they'll have some element of truth to them because they're speaking to, like, evolution.
Yeah, let's see. Aiken's asking about like Kabbalah and being scientific, saying that Kabbalah literature is written in Euclidean format of axioms and conclusions, like almost like Bertrand Russell or something like that. So you could go through the Kabbalistic literature and say, like, that's incorrect, like their axioms and conclusion like are flawed. But when you say Kabbalistic, why I say Kabbalistic is a scientific system that it is in axiom, conclusion, logical form. And because it's received wisdom, there's a lot of like problems with it, where like one thing is defined in one chapter one way, and then another chapter is defined a different way. And like maybe if you tried to like put it in mathematical form, it's like it doesn't make sense, it contradicts. You could make those arguments, but it's saying it's proposed in literally mathematical form. So I mean, you can't really argue that Kabbalah is not scientific. It's really literally laid out in mathematic Euclidean form.
Sorry, I just got a sneeze there. Ooh. Must be having allergies. Yeah, I totally get it. It's what you'd call like a natural science, which is kind of part of the argument I'm trying to make, is that like Ayurveda is a science. It's just not science the same way as Occidental science, which is like materialist reductionist science, which is one tiny little type of science. But general science can be approached many ways, and even if the elements are not, quote, correct, could still derive information.
You say it's not a material science.
Nobody was right. Nobody was right. If you want to look at it technically, nobody was right. Plato was wrong. You can say why he was wrong. You can say why everyone was wrong, because like, well, there's 118 elements. That's the right number of elements. Is that the right interpretation though, right? Go ahead, do it.
Well, I mean, scripture is almost never in scientific form, like Patanjali yoga. It's in axiomatic, it's in scientific form. Like, there's 8 paths to this form of suffering, and it's axiom conclusion. And even, like yoga is sourced in the Vedas, but the yogic literature, for people who, do like, breathing techniques or hatha yoga or even meditation, is written largely in scientific, like Euclidean axiom conclusion form, just like the Kabbalistic works. The Arizal's, Chaim Vital's description of the Arizal's, work, almost all the literature is an axiomatic form, where it starts out with a list of axioms and then derivatives from those axioms in complexity defining terms, like that. Like, it was purposely written and defined in that language. So when we say it's not scientific, it means like you've never even opened the book and looked at the literature. So you could say it's false, it's wrong, which is different than saying like it's not scientific. You're saying it's just been disproven or it's wrong. Which
you're basically making the argument that the method is lining up with science, i.e., positing hypothesis, doing experiment, checking results, right?
No, it's not experimental. I'm saying it's Euclidean. It's not scientific like
But I mean, if
testing.
they're using these things to give people advice, are they not doing that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So it is
It's
scientific in that.
it's making a prediction, right?
So yeah, I was mentioning to Jennifer one of the main focuses of Kabbalistic literature is helping barren women conceive, because according to Judaism, that's one of it's a big mitzvah. They're saying that's like the prime of the first mitzvah in the Torah is be fruitful and multiply. And it's like a barren woman, she hasn't been able to bear children, and it has to go to the Kabbalist, and the Kabbalist will have to determine the origin of her soul. And like from a spiritual perspective, that there was a reason for these teachings. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, transmigration of souls. It was like because the rabbi understood Kabbalistically, the transmigration of souls, this, like woman who had been barren and couldn't conceive, and he was able to tell her, like, like through some even mantra or something, or task taken, that they would overcome and miraculously. And that could be anything. It could be like a poor man becoming rich in later Hasidic circles, or like the golem, and any of these legends that would involve one of these methods. So it's saying, like, in theory, it's practical, because you're saying here's an explanation of how the spiritual and material realms interact, and then you're talking about, to some extent, the performance of miracles. That if you understand how and there are Kabbalist, so within Jewish theology, we believe that righteous people, so to say, could do miracles, and how that's possible is through Kabbalah. Whether it's possible that someone could do Kabbalah and conduct miracles is disputed. And so there's theoretical Kabbalists who just talk about, like, yeah, these things happen, they work, but you can't really know it. You can't, like, reincarnation's a fundamental part of Judaism, and the unfolding of our fates and why we're here and what we're doing. But anyone who tells you they know your past life, like that, they're crazy. That's not Judaism. But then there's schools of Kabbalists that say, like, yes, you can determine that stuff, and you go to Kabbalist and they do tell you that type stuff. So
That's a market thing. It's what people are willing to pay for. There's like a lowest common denominatorism when you have these kind of like seers that people are like, oh, I should really want to talk to my recently deceased relative, or was I Cleopatra in a past life? Like, I think when people make those kinds of claims, sort of edging towards the side of, like, grifting.
Well, so the Arizal historically is credited with, we believe that he correctly located the sites of these graves, and he said who was buried in these places, and it's largely accepted. Like, I did pilgrimage, I prayed at these places, and the reason largely that we think that these sites are these rabbis is because the Arizal said so. So there's a certain level of community trust, like when you're saying, okay, the leaders of the generation have to make these important decisions, and we're best to just generally follow, because we don't have enough information or power ability to make these decisions, and certain things we're better off not deciding for ourselves and should follow the leaders of the generation. And then you're saying that you could trust the leader of the generations. They probably actually know and understand Kabbalah and have a deeper insight into making these decisions than we could understand, including possibly knowing, so to say, the divine will, or the ability to conduct miracles. And when you talk about Hasidus, in some level, that just straight Judaism, like Abraham arguing with God about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the concept of personalism, or personal God that we could pray to and that would change reality, to the Hasidic movement, where miracles and charismatic rabbinic characters, or even Kabbalists that conducted miracles,
like the Baal Shem Tov means master of the holy name, and loosely translated as the giver of mantras. That so that is like in Hinduism, and the Hasidic folklore usually says, if you believe these stories are true, you're crazy, but if you believe that they're impossible, you're a heretic. So like generally, like, we're not promoting like miracle men and like saying like, oh, this is a miracle, it's obvious, but at the same time, like, we believe in it, and like there has to be a personal God who does miracles, and there has to be righteous gurus, leaders of the generation that God acts through in terms of granting blessings, that there is actually a process that works, that people could seek holy men who pray on behalf of people or give advice, and that God acts, so to say, through them. And it's saying the Arizal's theory, so it's like the collective soul concept, that righteous people have larger souls that contain the souls of other people within them, and it's really built into some things that would have tried to be overturned with like racism and slavery and royal caste systems, possibly in the Vedas, that these concepts also existed in terms of caste, that the higher caste people contain the lower castes within their souls. And that's also possible that there was pushback in like modern liberation, and but even see like celebrity, and that modern society with equality and liberalism still has celebrity and people rising to power, that you could still propose the concept like, does Donald Trump's soul contain either to say in totality or part of the soul of his followers' soul within him, that Donald Trump has like a collective city of souls that has tens of millions of souls within his soul, and that literally tens of millions of people across America have a portion of Donald Trump's soul within them. And from a Judeo concept, there's a tikkun, that Donald Trump's like tikkun purpose is larger and contains the purpose of tens of millions of people within them, so that tens of millions of people across America have a smaller purpose that they need to fulfill, and then Donald Trump has this greater purpose that contains within it the smaller purposes of the tens of millions of people across the soul. And even the Vedas has a similar system of leaders and kings, either karmatically, and I don't know if this concept of saying contain the soul of their followers within them makes sense to you.
It's not the first time I've heard a description like that. This idea of like a finite number of archetypes, and everybody's just a linear combination of a finite set of archetypes with different coefficients, right? So what you're saying to me and that both seem like artful, poetic representations of these. I don't know. Mysteries. Mystery seems like the only word. There seems to be a confusion in the chat as to what constitutes science. Okay, so just to be clear, if you have hypotheses which you are making predictions using and have some mechanism to ameliorate the accuracy of your hypotheses through experience, that's considered science. So we're trying to dig even deeper to ask like, well, what is it actually, what do we even have to do to even get a result in the first place? We got to solve the observer limit question, right? So when this methodology is employed, you can argue it's scientific, but that doesn't translate to the best interpretation of science. Because if you want to go and say this is the best interpretation of science, you need to define by what metric is it the best, right? Because what does it mean to be the best? It's a non-trivial question. So I understand there's a difference, but this is why I'm trying to get people thinking philosophically at the end of the day. Are you okay, Doovid?
Yeah, I've just thrown out my food the containers for the food that I ate, and Yeah, I would say also, like, if you're making an anachronism that the Arezzo is like a contemporary of Galileo, and he's saying that you could even possibly argue that the Arezzo also intuits or is part of the development of the scientific process. But certainly in his time, the literature of science in the time, that the Arezzo is relatively quite scientific, and you're just saying, just like Maimonides, the Ramban. I mean, Maimonides is quite scientific and saying he was a medical doctor, respected medical doctor, and presumably, that's scientific in terms of trial and error and results and pattern recognition. You're only a good doctor if you produce good results, and you're not going to move up in the ranks of being a doctor. And the Arezzo was known as a healer and great man, and so you put in the time. So you're saying, what does it mean to be a scientist? You're saying that obviously any of the ancient characters, none of them were scientists. Aristotle, Plato, Hippocrates, Pythagoras. You're talking about some largely something that came in the Enlightenment in the last few hundred years. You're going to think about, what does that even mean?
It's so interesting, this stuff, isn't it? I just keep thinking about the Platonic elements. Did you know that they have associated crystal shapes?
Yeah.
So I was talking to my husband about that, and I'm like, well, why do you think he added those? Why do you think he added these crystal shapes? And I guess he couldn't figure it out, but I said it's probably because Plato was aware of the existence of crystals, and he was trying to build up the entire universe from these root, quote unquote, elements, and he realized that elementals on their own weren't enough to explain the formation of crystals as he had observed them. And so he had to add this additional layer of interpretation. Is it correct? Well, I would say it's probably not very good, not very correct, but interesting. Perhaps.
Yeah, it's not really like Plato wasn't like a scientist who discovered the form. I'm saying it was likely a received wisdom related to idols, and the Pythagoreans, and just the literature that we have this wisdom from Plato. And Plato is representative of a school that's like a person who wrote books, but it's more than that. It's like a school of philosophers, and it's representative, so to say, of the best of Greek thought of the time. And he's saying, it's like, no, he didn't come up with the forms. He recognized, it's like a scientific discovery. Like is it like JF? Is it you're going to be nihilist on science and just say it's a preference, an equation, a scientific law isn't really true. It's just a preference. And if we use some law, even though it might be able to help build engineering mechanical devices, that's still just a preference. It's not really any truer than anything else. Or you're saying that no, there's a fundamental something, the material reality that is true, and this equation is representative of some greater fundamental truth that exists, and it wasn't no one invented it. It was just discovered, and some person attached equation representative form of something that is fundamental about reality.
Yeah, it's the blind guys touching the elephant thing. You know that meme, right?
Well, I mean, it's Jain, or Jain Vedic scripture. It's just it even has a Wikipedia page. If you bring it up, the elephant metaphor, and it's
like
disputed.
Not to go full hash head on you, but here's a question: how many points are there on a sphere?
Well, I mean, infinite.
Yeah, so how many versions of truth are there? There's infinity truths for one single finite object.
I mean, it's almost like like a Cantor, or even ancient, like a Zeno paradox. It could only be a perfect sphere if it has an infinite number of points, because if you look at any given 2 points, and measure them, then you say it can't be a perfect sphere. So as you get to the 2 points, there has to be another point in between them in order for it to be a perfect sphere. So I forget, I think there's even a proof of some sort of that. I have to think about it.
Yeah, it's also shunyata, nothingness, because anything has this sphere of nothingness dictating its behavior. So that's why I don't want to talk about souls, because people are like, I really don't want to get people triggered religiously. It's such a non-profitable spending time of energy. I'm not going to talk. I don't want to say soul. I want to say consciousness, and then soul is something else, because there's this archetypal sphere that exists beyond reality, and if people are identifying that as a soul, far be it for me to say which it is. Like, I don't even feel like I want to answer that question.
Well, if you're within the same cult, then you have a common lexicon. So, like if you're within Chabad, like you could use soul in the common lexicon because you have an accepted sages and accepted received wisdom and largely clear working definitions of these terms. And you're just like in various Vedic schools, like you remember ISKCON, then you have very clear delineations of the lexicon of what these terms mean. And so if you're doing interfaith dialogue, like hence the multiple truth hypothesis, the difficulty of various systems with different lexicons and concepts, where many times different words in different systems refer to different concepts. So one system could call, this concept of soul. In a different system, there's a different concept that's being called the same word. And, so Freemasonry works with this and tries to create a process for, so to say, this interfaith process to create larger structures of humanity working together. And it's largely like, so Freemasonry in the degree system is very similar to like Jennifer's chart, where it's an esoteric system of ranks and degrees and understandings to try to organize structures, recognizing that different peoples and societies have different axioms. And if you have like theoretical ranks of structures, that anywhere in the world or any structure or organization of any society, you're going to have various people playing similar roles. And those could be analyzed in a Masonic system to give them like a rank. This guy's a 12th degree Mason, a 6th degree Mason, and and fulfills this general purpose in the upholding of Dharma in society, that there's a larger society and structure, and that's determined on the cooperation of large amounts of people, and the cooperation of large amounts of people requires a certain amount of structure, and those structures have similarities that the Masonic structure relates to degrees. But any sort of meta-analysis system like that is sensical. That's why I say you breathe in Freemasonry, saying that like a mathematical equation, that Freemasonry is not just like a preference heuristic in order to create patterns to navigate life better, but it's actually a recognition of some spiritual structural truth that permeates reality.
I think the best word for it is like natural science, because it's an approach to science that arises naturally. That way you can speak to the different systems without having to get lost in the weeds of the correct interpretation, because there's no such thing as correct, because if you want to go to the limit of correctness, you're in something near indecipherable. So if nobody can understand the totally correct version, of what use is it? It's kind of the argument.
When so if God forbid in ancient times child sacrifice had a natural science interpretation, like people like, okay, this evil incarnated spirit was brought every generation or every so many families, and in order to appease the gods in judgment, there has to be a sacrifice, and it's based upon even beliefs of reincarnations and spirits and predetermination, that that's a natural science, and that's like anthropology, and that's even like Bosian, um, Frankfurt School of Anthropology, where it's saying like, yeah, I mean, it's cultural relativism, is that all cultures through natural science are developed and basically equal and relative, because it was the same scientific process that created all societies.
It wasn't, though. They're largely adapted to particular environmental circumstances. So you can say that there's information within these systems that can be used to infer things about genetic history, but you have to be able to interpret it correctly, obviously. Very easy to get false positives in this domain because people come at it with a pre-existing bias, and it's like, you get the best results when you don't have a bias. Trust me. It's way more interesting.
Well, that's like that. I mean, but it is really, because you're saying like, okay, in India, because of population density and ecological, carbon cycle,
A big
that,
part of it was the protection from the other parts of the world granted by the mountain range of the Himalayas.
what I'm saying, that vegetarianism, I mean, this is the anthropological explanation.
That environment selected
environment
for
didn't support meat eating.
vegetarianism because it doesn't have an environment that can support enough meat to feed everybody, basically. So vegetarianism arose evolutionarily, in India, which is sort of self-segregated via the mountain range for the majority of its history.
Yeah, so if you're saying it's like it's not a universal moral, and so in India, vegetarianism is moral because it's selected for the environment as a different area, got for like David Duke in the cold winter theory, and the importance of meat eating in northern climates, or something.
It's very important to eat meat if you're going to worship blue eyes. Remember that, kids. If you want to be a blue eye worshiper, eat a lot of meat because they seem to go hand in hand.
Well, I mean, that's the cold winter theory, and saying that's the current evolutionary
What's
understanding.
the idea? We was winter desert raiders. What's that narrative exactly? That it forced cooperation more or something? It's actually less because there's more segregation because you don't move around as much in the winter, but okay.
Well, I mean, it's mostly long-term planning. That in cold winter theory, whatever reason people went north, and to survive in the north required more long-term planning, and the lightening of the features was symbolic of lower testosterone levels. I mean, correlate also to lower testosterone levels, but to also.
I don't think there's any connection. I think they have higher testosterone because of more meat eating. Doesn't meat eating boost testosterone? Wouldn't they have more then? With all the Thor LARPing? Come on. Rawr! Cling! The whole Thor and the thunder god.
Well, I'm not a biologist. I'm saying if you're mixing
they're high T gods is what I'm saying.
But if you're mixing the spiritual and the anthropological, you're saying that the environment.
That's the argument I'm making. It's reflections of people.
But I'm saying the environmental reaction that anybody who moved north, maybe different people might have reacted according to the naturally boundary conditions and inclinations, but moving north had a natural inclination to select for things like lighter features and long-term planning and individualism. And so if you take an evolutionary process that, saying whatever reason the mutations or that whoever had these qualities was more likely to survive, and then you'd have sexual selection process where those qualities were selected for. But that just moving north, that people moved to India selected for vegetarianism, and people who moved north selected
They didn't
for.
move. They didn't move to India. They were in India, and being in India selected for vegetarianism. The same way being in the north, it's not really a selection for. It's a spontaneous state transition. It's the body recognizing I don't need this. It's better for me to get my nutrients through almost transparent skin than the alternate way, which is when there's too much sun. So there's the melanin that does the job of absorbing it all.
So it's an important thing that you have in your your diagram, that the top category was school. You think in the ancient world, generally that was a person category, like like in the ancient Israel Roman times, people's identification was their name, their city of birth, their school, and maybe like a leadership position, like like a rabbi or Roman equivalent in their time. But the information of their city and their school, because the school was the important piece of information of the larger structure for how people interpret and
Yeah, it's basically why Claire gets so triggered, because she's like, well, what's your ideology? She's basically asking, well, what school, from whence school dost thou forgot the
what I'm saying.
word.
So where does evolution, is evolution already a school, or is evolution not even a school? So
What
like
you could say
you're
is that
saying, if you're saying
school,
atheism is the school and evolution is a like it is a son of atheism.
well, evolution at its very basic bare bones interpretation is the idea that life changes somehow over time, that there's an evolving from one form to another. I think that's so that then you can go and say, well, you can say, first of all, yes, this happens, or no, it doesn't. So no, it doesn't would be like a pure creationism, pure nothing evolved. And then you have evolution, which could be interpreted in any number of ways. And the question is, which of those interpretations gives us the results that we observe with the least amount of extra stuff? Because it's really hard to understand this stuff. So we don't want extraneous stuff that's incomprehensible and not actually bolstering the answer. Does that makes sense?
Yeah, it's saying, I mean, if you put it into mathematical form, sometimes it's more abstract. They put it into lexicon. So it's like, what like, is a school really the highest category? What's the father? What's the son? So in the Talmud, what's the father?
School, if it's accurate, it gives you a lot of information about a person. If you know to interpret it properly, it basically tells you what their entire thought process is. But it's only if it's accurate, or only if somebody actually identifies with the school, right? Which, who's going to actually say that? Because the only school we have, what, in the modern day, we have, orthodox science, which is like materialist reductionism at best.
Well, so I make the point that in Talmud and rabbinic thought, what's a father and what's a son is not determined by logic. It's a received wisdom from Scripture. So it's like Arba Avos Nazikim, these are the 4 categories of damages, or these are the 39 categories of forbidden work on the Sabbath. It isn't derived from logic, that's derived from Scripture. And so it's saying that's revealed from God, that these are the heads of categories that things could be derived from, which is interpretation. So you're saying you can't actually figure that out by logic. Maybe you could have figured it out by logic, but it's just a point of note that you're saying that so what's the father and what's the son in terms of like, is materialism the father and atheism the son? Is evolution the son? Atheism the father, or these various things. And you could use logical arguments and structures, but like in the Talmud, the main categories that are used for at least the law as the Talmud sees it, is a received wisdom that from Scripture, that these are the heads that of categories from which other things could be derived.
Well, my system has 3 realms. So I don't know if you could really you could say that the photonic is the pure form realm is the father of the photonic realm, and the photonic realm is the father of the material realm, if you want to put it in those terms.
Well, I mean, that's sensical in saying, like, because if you're looking at form, like father son is one of the most essential forms, and it's the circle of birth and life. And if you're saying logical derivatives, so the method of the Bible and Torah is Divrei Torah B'Lashon B'nai Adam. In the Talmud, the words of the Torah are written in the words of the common man. So science is not that way, and Kabbalah is generally not that way. Kabbalah is not written in the words of the common man like Scripture, and the words of science is not written in the common words of man. The words of science is written in formula, axiom, conclusions, logical format, and just as like the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic texts are generally written in logical, what I'm calling scientific format. You could play around with the lexicon, if you want to say that's not really scientific, but like a logical format, as per Scripture is purposely written in, so to say, everyday language, and saying what's the greater truth. So a Scripture that speaks in everyday language talks about fathers and sons, because everybody knows what a father and son is. Like, I mean, if a woman, they know mothers and daughters, but saying like, I'm a son, hopefully one day I'll be a father. And so that's an everyday language category that you don't have to learn some esoteric theoretical subject like mathematics or logic to understand.
Yeah, it's almost something that you use logic to understand. So like it's a question of like, is bad logic still logic? And then it's like, well, yeah, it is, because all logic is not perfect because it's restricted to axioms. So unless you understand what that means in the greater scheme of things, you're going to eventually make a statement using perfect logic that's going to end up being incorrect prediction. It's just the nature of the beast, really. So in a way, you can say religious teachings are superior to these abstract teachings because they actually are designed with the everyman in mind. It doesn't mean we can't infer a purpose to them. It just means that it's not really something you can describe using the truth the same way that science understands truth. You can still be scientific. You just have to understand that it's, I don't want to say quantum science, but to me, when you're dividing things up into elements and having this logarithmic creation of microstates, well, yeah, that is pretty scientific. I don't really see any alternative or counter thesis coming out of my secular counterparts, so I'm just going to keep going with this one. My crabological model. So if it's good with the crabs, if it's good with the octopi, and if it's good with humans, it's good with me.
Oh, because you want to wrap up here?
Yeah, awesome. That was a great show. And sorry we couldn't talk to you more, Roger. Hopefully next time. And yeah, thanks for being here with us this week, dude. Did you have any fun?
Yeah, so tomorrow on Root and Branch, we have, I'm not sure if Jennifer is going to be part of it, but I'll probably be, if I can, My Life as a Drama Therapist by Miss Laura Ledbetter. And I saw Lowell in 2013. I lived in New York for a while and did his kind of interviews and shows IRL for a good few months with Laura Ledbetter on a previous YouTube channel. So she's going to be the guest tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we have black operations across North America intriguing Israel making aliyah by retired Pentagon action officer Alexander Cuppet. And so I guess
think
here
I'll
we have
check that.
someone who
I'll check that one out.
worked
That
at-
sounds interesting. Maybe not the drama
Yeah,
one. Women like
So I'll
to have
probably
all the spotlight, so I'll give her all the spotlight.
I'll
Very
probably
nice.
go on both, and I don't know if Lowell looks like he probably could, go live without your help if you're around, or anyone tunes in. But I'm going to be working together, so hopefully grow the content and network and so go through Lowell's network of people, and over a few months, hope that meet tens of people, and maybe if I even do it for a few years, I mean hundreds of people. So that's this week's guests. If it's interesting to anybody, and I'll be monitoring the chat if people wanted to participate in that or ask questions in the chat there. So if that pretty interesting conversation, like I'm still trying to move through studying the Arizal's gate of reincarnation. So I'm probably not going to do my Ask the Rabbi on reincarnation until I finish studying that. It might even take me like another month, because like I'm just doing a chapter a day, and there's like 40 chapters. I'm only chapter 11. And so I don't know if I'm going to be releasing any more streams.
Is it really
and, like,
dense?
Well, I mean, it has some commentary. So there's like, the each chapter has sub chapters. So like, like your average chapter has like 4 or 5 sub chapters. So you're talking like 10. If I do a chapter a day, it's still like 10, 20 pages of reading, and a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's like Euclidean. It's scientific. It's axiom conclusion. So there's a lot of just like straight up like. Like here, I mean, I have chapter 11 open, summary of the soul. Just like there are 4 worlds. Their nickname: Abaya, Atzila, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Each world consists of 5 partsuvin. They are Eric Ampin, Abba, and Ima, Zer Ampin, and Nukva of Zer Ampin. And I'm just, these are Aramaic terms. Each of the
that
3
sounds
worlds.
kind of awesome.
I mean, it's pretty scientific. It's like purely axiomatic, and then it goes into derivatives.
Well, you gotta go deeper, because what's happening is you have like this juxtaposition. So you have, what did you just say, 4, and then the other one was how many?
5.
So 20 microstates. Do you see how that works? So it's like it's like a counting thing. Like how big can you count is the tally of the microstates. It's like going through.
Well, I'm just explaining why I'm only doing a chapter a day, because it's kind of like mathematical formulaic, where each chapter is like laying out definitions and conclusions and kind of like formulas and how to use them. So
are you interested in doing Kabbalistic thermodynamics?
I'm not sure, like because as a Jew, I could look at it just as my obligation to God to try to study this wisdom and understand it, and I'm better off not having a desire for how to use it, and to just be studying it because that's my obligation or method of serving God. So it's probably a better perspective than trying to have some sort of like, I'm studying it for this reason. Like, no, I'm studying to serve God and to understand how God created the world.
Okay.
And then, if added on to that, like Tikkun Olam, in order to understand how to make the world a better place, and, in order to learn the science of Tikkun Olam from that perspective. Like, I believe in Tikkun Olam, and I'm learning this wisdom of the Arizal, basically the father of Tikkun Olam, to carry out the process of Tikkun Olam better.
Awesome. I
Yeah,
can definitely relate to feeling like you want to do better. And so
Well, it's
hopefully
that you
that's
really
the end
have to
result
have
of
that
all this.
attitude. And I mean, in theory, like if you read the books like instill that like you can't even read these books if you don't have that attitude. It's like in the introduction and like every other page of these books is just like, you know, the reminder that you need that attitude in order to even you know, be able to read the book. Like you would have karmatically, like if you didn't have that attitude, you wouldn't even be able to like pick up the book and read it.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing, and we'll see everybody next Sunday, if not sooner. And I'll be on that call.
I'll sign off if you want to monologue a few minutes.
Yeah, okay. If anyone has any final questions, I'm happy to answer them. It was a pretty interesting show. I really enjoyed the crab thing because I knew there was something to it, you know. And looking at a couple of videos, I could see that because there's like a circuit, and part of the circuit runs through part of the body. So there's like a bunch of sort of parallel entangled circuits, and then the, you know, crab's consciousness is like sort of in the center of the entangled bit, that circle in the middle. And so he's got two states of mind there for one waveform. So I was pretty excited about that. It's fun to visualize because there's an actual animating potential under the body. And when you look at animals moving, it's mysterious because, you know, they're in 3 dimensions, they got, you know, usually 4 legs or whatever, but their movement of everything is not independent. So it's a cycle, and it's like sort of a circle, and the circle could be sort of seen as partially intersecting with the body. And there's a finite number of those circles. And so you can switch around between them, but there's a limited mobility, basically. So you can even see this with your fingers and compare the mobility of, let's say, the index to the pinky. So there's definitely less mobility in the pinky. And that's the measurement limit again, flaring up. So our evolutionary history is basically us figuring out hacks around the measurement limit to optimize our computational efficiency. Okay, great. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and take care.
That's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck your goddamn logic?
They control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, you know, we've had these streams, and you know, I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and you know, she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?